Hello everyone, thank you for listening to my story. If you haven't fallen asleep yet, you might as well listen to this story, and maybe you will fall asleep soon. Before listening, please like and subscribe first. Of course, the premise is that you really like my content. If you have any thoughts or feelings, please leave a message below. Your opinions will really help me grow. Okay, enough chit-chat. Let's get started. I woke up when rain poured into my collar. My throat felt like it had been rubbed by sandpaper, and my right hand was clenched so hard it hurt. I lowered my head and saw the blood seeping from between my fingers flowing down my wrist, leaving a small dark red pit in the rain. There was a metal buckle stuck in the palm of his hand, with the letters LM engraved on it, and the blood filled the engraving so brightly. "Don't move." The bright light made me squint. Two men in reflective vests rushed over. One held my shoulders and the other tied my wrists with a plastic restraint belt. I wanted to shout, but only hoarse sounds came out of my throat. What were they saying? Jeweler, murder weapon, surveillance. Police sirens blared over the sound of rain. I was tucked into the back seat, my knees pressed against the front seat, and blood was dripping onto the vinyl mats in small smudges. The wipers swung back and forth, and the neon lights outside the glass became blurred blocks of color, like the kaleidoscope I played with when I was a child. The disinfectant in the hospital corridor stung my nose. As the nurse pulled at my shirt, I caught a glimpse of the name tag on my hospital gown, Ellery West. The name rolled around on my tongue, and it sounded so unfamiliar, like someone else's. The brain CT scan shows old damage in the parietal lobe. The doctor held up the film. It could be post-traumatic amnesia. It's possible that he can't remember recent or long-term memories. I stared at the digital clock on the wall. 2:17 in the morning. 3 hours earlier, jeweler Lucien Murdoch had been murdered in his apartment 6 blocks away, and a bloody cufflink had been found at the scene. Exactly the same one in my palm. Ellery, a female voice came from behind. I turned around and saw a woman in a beige windbreaker standing at the door of the ward, her eyes red and a brown paper bag in her hand. When she walked over, she brought with her a scent of jasmine perfume, which was so strong that it seemed like she was deliberately covering up something. "I'm Claire, your wife." She pushed the photo in front of me. The corners of the photo paper were curled up, and it was a wedding photo. A woman in a white wedding dress was leaning on my shoulder, and I was wearing a suit and holding a bunch of lilies in my hands. I stared at myself in the photo. There was no accelerated heartbeat, no warm feeling. It was like watching someone else's story. A car accident 3 months ago. She pulled out a piece of medical record. The doctor said you might forget the people close to you. Her fingers were shaking, but her eyes were so bright it didn't look like she was crying. The detectives from the Major Crimes Unit arrived at 4 in the morning. Her name is Jane Hawke. She wears the police badge on her left chest, and her uniform is ironed without a wrinkle. She placed the evidence bag on the bedside table. Inside was the cufflink, the blood having coagulated into a dark brown color. Lucien Murdoch's personal cufflinks, each with his initials engraved on it. Her voice was like an ice cone. The surveillance showed that you appeared downstairs of his apartment at 1:15 a.m., and at 17 a.m., the elevator went up to the 12th floor. He lived on the 12th floor. I opened my mouth. "I don't remember." "What do you remember?" She flipped open her notebook. "Address. Cell phone number. What's the name of the B&B you run?" "B&B." I was stunned. "Puffin?" I was surprised when I said it. Where did this word come from? Jane paused. "The Puffin B&B, yes, is registered under your name." And Claire said, "You are allergic to pollen, especially tulips." I shook my head. Claire was just saying that I had a rash last week from touching tulips in the florist's shop, but I can't even remember the smell of the tulips. "Your wife said she would bail you out." Jane closed the book. "But I suggest you cooperate with the investigation." When she stood up, her coat rubbed against the bedside table, and the medical record book flipped pages. By the way, Malaga, etc. The temple suddenly exploded. I covered my head as a dazzling light flashed before my eyes. A red-roofed house, a wall covered with bougainvillea, and someone shouted, Ellery in Spanish. The voice sounded like it was soaked in honey. Are you okay? Jane held my shoulders. I gasped. Malaga, where is that? She didn't answer, just stared at me. The rain was still falling outside the window, and the sound of it hitting the glass was like someone typing in Morse code. At 6 in the morning, Claire returned with the bail documents. Her perfume was stronger, and she had a pearl bracelet on her wrist. I was sure it wasn't in the photo. Let's go home. She took my hand. Her fingertips were as cold as ice. I followed her out of the hospital, the rain falling on my face. In the distance, the church bells rang 6 times. There was a silver car parked downstairs. Claire opened the passenger door, and as I got in, I caught a glimpse of a black folder in the back seat with half a sheet of paper sticking out. It was Lucien Murdoch's jewelry business license. Fasten your seat belts. She started the car, and the wipers began to move. In the rearview mirror, Jane Hawke was standing at the hospital entrance, looking at us. Her police hat was wet from the rain, and her eyes under the brim were like 2 small lights so bright that it was disturbing. As the car drove into the rain, I felt my pockets. There was also the CT film given by the nurse, and the cellophane packaging made a rustling sound. The image of the red roof came up again, clearer this time. There was a rusty mailbox in the corner with the words Sunny Courtyard written on it in blue paint. Claire suddenly said, I'll make you some hot cocoa when we get home. It was your favorite drink. I looked out the car window at the street scene receding. The old houses in Amsterdam blurred into shadows in the rain, but the 4 words Sunny Courtyard became clearer and clearer, as if someone had carved a mark in my mind with a branding iron. Hot cocoa, hay fever, wife. These words floated in the rain and fog like pearls that had broken off the string, each rolling in a different direction. I followed Claire into the apartment. There was an oil painting hanging in the entrance hall, showing waves crashing against white rocks, the same background as the wedding photo she showed the police. But as soon as my fingers touched the edge of the photo frame, cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Was that smiling man in a white shirt in the photo really me? The bathroom has a new non-slip mat. Claire threw the key into the glass bowl. You slipped in the shower last time and got a bump on your forehead. When she turned around, her pearl bracelet flashed under the hallway light. Why don't you change your clothes first? The bedroom is on the left-hand side of the 2nd floor. There is a faint scent of lavender in the corridor on the 2nd floor. I pushed open the bedroom door and saw our wedding photo on the bedside table. Claire in a lace dress, me in a suit, with the Amsterdam Canal in the background. But when I squatted down to pack my suitcase, an iron box rolled out from under the bed. Inside was half a bottle of unopened pollen barrier, the production date of which was half a year ago. What are you looking for? Claire's voice came from behind. My hand shook, and the iron box fell on the carpet. She bent down to pick it up and tapped the bottle with her fingernails. I bought it last time after I had an allergy. You always forget to use it. When she smiled, the fine lines at the end of her eyes looked like cracked spider webs. It's time for lunch. Hot cocoa with smoked salmon. Remember? Do I remember? I stared at the mug she brought me. There was a layer of cream floating on the surface of the brown liquid. Last week she told the police that I had a rash from touching tulips, but there wasn't even a potted plant in the apartment. Why no flowers? Claire paused as she was cutting the bread with her knife.
You're allergic, idiot.
When she looked up, her pupils shrank to the size of pinpoints. Why are you asking this all of a sudden? I didn't answer. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Dr. Van is here. Claire opened the door and saw a man in a grey suit carrying a leather briefcase. His eyes curved into crescents behind his lenses. Ellery, I'm Arno van Doren. Claire said you have had some memory problems lately. Should we talk? He asked me to sit on the sofa and handed me a glass of warm water. Relax, it's like chatting with an old friend. His voice was like honey. Remember the car accident 3 months ago? Car accident. I clutched the side of the cup. Fragments of the image came flooding back. The sound of sudden brakes. The crisp sound of glass breaking. Blood flowing down the corner of his forehead into his collar. And then blank. I can't remember clearly. It's okay. Van Doren's fingertips pressed lightly on my wrist. You were driving and Claire was sitting in the passenger seat. She was thrown out of the car and you slammed the steering wheel to save her. His voice became softer and softer. You later woke up in the hospital and didn't remember anything. I stared at his Adam's apple, but Claire said she was on a business trip. I was shocked when I said this. Where did this idea come from? Van Doren smiled. Trauma distorts memory. He pulled out his pocket watch and shook it. Follow the hands and slowly close your eyes. There was a sound in the darkness. You met Lucien. Right. Van Doren's voice seemed to come from the other end of the tunnel. He threatened you and said he would expose the secret of the B&B. You were so scared, you grabbed the cufflinks off the table. Cufflinks. Sweat broke out on my forehead. No, not me. You lost control of your emotions. His voice became even softer. You pushed him, and he hit the corner of the table. Blood splattered on your clothes. I opened my eyes suddenly. Van Doren was putting away his pocket watch, and Claire was standing in the hallway, twisting her pearl bracelet between her fingers. He needs to rest. Van Doren patted my shoulder. We'll continue at the same time next week. After they left, I found an old atlas in the corner of the living room. When I opened it, a yellowed piece of paper floated out. It was a map of Malaga, Spain, with sunny courtyard circled in red in the corner. As soon as my fingertips touched the line of words, my temples began to throb. A rusty mailbox, a wall covered with bougainvillea, and an old woman shouting Ellery in Spanish, her voice like it was soaked in honey. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up because of thirst. The kitchen refrigerator was glowing coldly, and I was groping in the dark for a cup of water when my elbow bumped into the cupboard. With a crash, something fell at my feet, a wooden box hidden in the deepest part of the cupboard. The moment the lid of the box opened, I almost screamed. There was a note inside with crooked handwriting. You are not the murderer, don't believe her. There was an arrow drawn on the back, pointing to Malaga Sunshine Courtyard. I rushed into the living room, clutching the note, and the atlas was still spread out on the coffee table. The red roofs of Malaga blurred into a blur on the paper, but the arrow was like a ball of fire burning my palms. At 4 in the morning, Jane called. Can you come to the dock warehouse? She said, breathlessly. I found photos of Lucien's death scene, and I have something to show you. When the warehouse door creaked open, Jane held up an evidence bag. This is a fingerprint on the wall at the scene. She shone a laser pen into the corner of the photo. It doesn't belong to you, and it doesn't belong to Lucien. I stared at the faint fingerprint. Whose? I don't know. Jane turned off the laser pointer, but I can be sure that someone entered the scene when you were unconscious. She pulled out a bank statement from a folder. Lucien's account in Vancouver had a large transfer 3 months ago. The recipient was Puffin B&B. My head buzzed. But I'm the owner of the B&B. It's in your name. Jane tapped the table. But Claire said you rarely managed the business before you lost your memory. She suddenly grabbed my wrist. Ellery, did you find anything last night? I touched the note in my pocket. Sunny patio in Malaga. Jane's pupils suddenly contracted. Marta Rodriguez? She took out a file from the drawer. The photo showed an old woman wearing a flowered apron. 3 years ago, the Malaga police had an informant, codenamed Puffin. He helped crack a transnational smuggling case, and then suddenly disappeared. A car horn was heard outside the warehouse. I looked out the window, the silhouette of the silver car, flickering under the streetlight. Claire is here. I took 2 steps back. I have to go. Jane handed me a business card and said, If you find anything, call this number. When I got into Claire's car, she was reapplying lipstick in the rearview mirror. Where did you go so late? She dug her nails into the back of my hand. Dr. Fan said you need to rest. Meeting a friend. I stared at the pearl bracelet on her wrist, exactly the same as the new season model from Lucien Jewelry. She stepped on the accelerator. The rain started to fall again, and the wipers swung back and forth, turning the watermarks on the glass into a blur. I touched the note in my pocket. The red roofs of Malaga became clearer and clearer in the rain and fog. Tomorrow, I will go to Sunshine Garden. I stayed up until 5 in the morning, smelling of Claire's perfume. While she was curled up on the sofa snoring, I stole the car keys from her bag. The Audi in the garage started up very quietly. I parked at a convenience store 3 kilometers away and bought a ticket to Malaga with cash. Claire always said I had a bad memory, but I forgot the emergency euros I had hidden under my mattress. My heart was beating like a drum during the airport security check. It wasn't until the plane broke through the clouds that I dared to touch the note in my pocket. The arrow was softened by the body temperature, and the full word sunny courtyard on the back was soaked with light blue watermarks. The night wind in Malaga is a bit salty. I stood at the intersection marked on the map and looked up to see the red roofs on the hillside. The iron gate of the old house was rusty, but the door knocker was polished to a shine. I just raised my hand when a voice suddenly came from the door. "Is that Miguel?" The door was opened a crack, and the old woman's silver hair looked white in the moonlight. She was wearing a floral apron with a half-filled pencil stuck in the pocket, exactly the same as the photo in Jane's file. "You're finally back." She grabbed my wrist, her strength not that of an old person. "I've been waiting for you for 3 years." My throat tightened. "You know me, Miguel Rojas." She pulled me in. "Last winter, a German came to ask you about the money you owed him for the jewelry. I chased him out with a broom." She pointed to the iron broom on the porch, with a fresh crack in the wooden handle. The fireplace in the living room was still burning, with a string of shell wind chimes placed beside it. She took out a tin box from the drawer, which was full of newspaper clippings. Transnational jewelry smuggling case. Informant Puffin helps solve the case. Key witness suddenly disappeared. Puffin is your code name. She pushed the newspaper clipping to me. "You lived in the attic room, and you always said you wanted to save money to open a B&B in Amsterdam." She fished out another letter, the seal of which was not taped tightly. "Before you left, you said that if anything happened, you should send this to the Dutch police." The edges of the letter were yellowed, and it began with, "To the Amsterdam Crime Unit." I scanned the words Lucien Murdoch, and my fingers began to tremble. The letter described how I approached Lucien as a B&B owner, how I discovered that he used a jewelry store as a cover for smuggling, and how I was asked to go to Vancouver to open a secret account, which matched the bank statements Jane had found. "He came to see me last month," Marta said suddenly. "He wore gold-rimmed glasses and said he was your psychiatrist." I looked up sharply. "Van Doren?" She nodded. "He asked if you had left anything behind." I said there was a loose patch on the attic floor, and he squatted there and knocked for half an hour. She pointed to the ceiling. Then I secretly nailed the pine board shut. The attic ladder creaked. Marta held the candle and I knelt on the floor in front of it. As expected, the third wooden board had signs of being pried open. I used my fingernails to scratch the gap, and the board bounced back with a click. There was a black recorder lying inside. My hands were shaking when I pressed play. "Where is the key?" It was Lucien's voice, panting. "The Vancouver account. Do you think you can hide it?" I said I didn't take it. Another voice sounded. It was me, and it was lower than it is now. "If you come over here again, I'll call the police." "Call the police?" Lucien laughed. "Do you think the police know you are an informant? All they know is that you're a murderer." The recording suddenly stopped. I stared at the recorder, and the old injury behind my ear began to throb. Marta patted me on the back and said, "You came to me that day. and said that Lucien suspected you and wanted to go to Amsterdam to hide. She pointed out the window and said, "I haven't seen you since then." The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Jane. "Received your letter. Spanish police confirmed. Waiting for you to come back." Then I remembered that Marta said she sent a copy of the letter to the Netherlands yesterday. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I was squatting in the airport lobby charging. Claire had 23 missed calls, the last of which was a text message. "Dr. Fan said you might have a seizure. I'll be waiting for you at the arrival gate." The boarding announcement sounded. I stuffed the recorder into the secret compartment on my heel and folded the map into small pieces and held them in my hand. Outside the glass door, a woman in a camel coat was talking on the phone. It was Claire, and she was wearing the same burgundy lipstick as yesterday. When she looked up, I quickly lowered my head. The transfer notice played on a loop above my head. I stared at the 3 letters Amsterdam on the electronic screen and heard my own heartbeat drowning out the broadcast. The shell wind chime that Marta gave me was ringing softly in the bag. I touched the original letter in my pocket and suddenly remembered what she said when she closed the door. "If anyone asks again, just say I sealed the attic floor with cement." Now, what the cement couldn't seal was burning inside my heels. When I stuffed the envelope into the mailbox in the farthest corner of the airport lobby, my knuckles scraped against the metal edge and beads of blood oozed out. Claire's camel coat was still swaying outside the glass door. She lowered her head to look at the watch, and the ends of her hair were blown by the wind. She looked exactly the same as when she was waiting for me to wake up in the hospital corridor 3 months ago. At that time, the teardrop mole at the corner of her eye exuded tenderness. The phone vibrated and burned in my pocket. It was a message from Claire. "I saw you. Don't hide." I held the mailbox key tightly, and blood dripped from between my fingers onto the stamp on the envelope. Jane's police station address was written by Marta in cursive script, which was now a little blurred by blood, like a deformed red rose. "Ellery?" Claire's voice came from behind, sickeningly sweet. I ordered hot cocoa. "You have a bad stomach. Drink this." She handed me a paper cup, and I deliberately let my fingers brush against the wall of the cup when I took it. The temperature was just right. It must have been freshly bought. As expected, she didn't follow me to the mailbox. In the car, I stared at the tulip billboard receding outside the window and pretended to look through the photo album on my phone. The recorder photos taken at Marta's house yesterday were still there, and suddenly the screen went dark and a hidden folder popped up that required a password. For some unknown reason, I entered May 15, 1992. Marta said this was my birthday, as recorded in the B&B registration book. After 2 seconds of black screen, a blurry photo popped up. The photo shows me in a black leather jacket on a rainy day in Vancouver, with Lucien next to me. He held my arm tightly and we both ran. In the background we could see the neon sign of Royal Bank. The timestamp in the lower right corner of the photo reads June 15, 2023, 2 weeks before Lucien's death. "What are you looking at?" Claire suddenly turned her head. I quickly locked the screen, my heart beating so hard that it hurt my ribs. Marta's shell wing chime. She said it was sent to the B&B. She smiled and said, "Dr. Fan said that your memory has fluctuated a lot recently. I will accompany you to do an MRI tomorrow. I want to go to Vancouver for a follow-up." I interrupted her. The doctor in the Netherlands said that I should go back to the original surgical team for the old injury. The car suddenly became quiet. Claire tapped her fingers on the steering wheel twice, very slowly, as if counting her heartbeats. "Okay, I'll book a flight for the day after tomorrow." That night I squatted in front of the suitcase and pried open the compartment with my fingernails. The metal sheet glowed coldly under the desk lamp. It was a miniature tracker, the same model I had used when I was an informant 3 years ago. I had also taught new recruits how to hide this thing back then. Claire was on the phone in the living room, her voice low. "He's going to Vancouver?" "Yes, as planned." Dr. Fan said it's okay. I put the tracker back in its place and touched the recorder in my heel. Marta once said that what cannot be sealed by cement is the human heart. The wind in Vancouver is colder than in Amsterdam. I was standing in front of the bank building, and a warning came from the security guard's intercom. No unauthorized persons allowed. I was about to turn around when a voice with a Cantonese accent rang out from behind me. Miguel's friend. I looked back. A woman in a navy blue uniform was holding a tablet, with an emerald earring behind her ear, exactly the same as the Sunshine Courtyard informant token that Marta had mentioned. Isabel Chen. She held out her hand. 3 years ago you helped me catch a jeweler who was laundering money. Have you forgotten? My throat tightened as the screen in the vault surveillance room lit up. In the picture, Lucien held up a switchblade, the tip of the knife against the back of the bank clerk's neck. Open LM's box. The moment the metal box was pried open, stacks of jewelry appraisal certificates slid out, and the top one read, "Unregistered diamond 57 carats, entered through the port of Malaga," exactly the same as the smuggling route Marta had described. The camera suddenly shook. I appeared in the picture, with Lucien grabbing me by the collar, and there was a blood mark on my face. He leaned close to my ear and lip-synced clearly, "If you don't hand over the key, you are the murderer." This is the video footage from 3 days before the incident. Isabel hit the pause button. Lucien's account was frozen after that day. The signature of the authorized person is E. West, your initials. I took out my phone, and the time code of the video jumped on the screen. Isabel handed over an encrypted USB drive. Make a copy and leave it with someone you trust. The airport broadcast was urging people to board the plane. I walked into the bathroom holding the USB drive, locked the door, and opened Jane's chat box. The cursor in the input box flashed again and again, and finally, only one sentence was sent. "The wind in Vancouver is stronger than expected." The phone vibrated, and it was Jane's reply, "Waiting for the stone you throw." I shoved the USB drive into the bottom layer of the tissue box and flushed the toilet. The eyes of me in the mirror were red, like another me trapped behind the glass. As the plane climbed, I looked at the clouds outside the window, and my foot hurt from the recorder in my heel. The surveillance copy Isabel gave me was spinning in the cloud on the phone. When the progress bar reached 99%, the screen suddenly went black. It was a message from Claire. "Remember to call me when you land, honey." I turned off the phone. Some truths should be revealed. The phone screen was blindingly bright. I crouched in the airport bathroom stall, digging my fingernails into my palms. The encrypted USB drive Isabel had given me was hidden at the bottom of a tissue box. The cloud-based backup of surveillance footage had just finished uploading 99% of the way when Claire's message popped up. "Call me when you land, honey." I quickly turned off the phone, and the metal back cover felt hot against my thigh. The gray hoodie I bought during the transfer covered half of my face, and my sunglasses slid to the tip of my nose. I stared at the word Amsterdam on the airport sign, and my Adam's apple moved. Marta once said that what cement cannot seal is the human heart. But now, what I want to tear open is the lies that have been buried in the cement for 3 months. The raindrops were hitting my face as they landed. I didn't go through the luggage carousel, but went straight into the bathroom in the arrival hall, and stuffed the recorder hidden in the heel into the interlayer of my newly bought canvas shoes. The person in the mirror had eyes as red as if he had been awake for 3 days, and his hat brim was pulled down so low that he couldn't even recognize himself. "Do you need help?" The cleaning lady pushed a cart past. I shook my head and heard footsteps outside the door. Her heart suddenly beat faster. Claire's people should be waiting for Ellery West, not this tourist wearing a hoodie and carrying a second-hand backpack. I walked around 3 blocks, bought a fluorescent yellow cycling helmet at a convenience store, and then changed trams twice. The last section of the journey was run. My rain boots stepped through the puddles, soaking my trouser legs. The oak door of the B&B was locked, I took out the spare key, hidden in the gap of the door lintel. When the metal teeth were stuck into the keyhole, the scar on the back of my hand suddenly felt itchy. Was this an old injury, or a newly remembered one? The wooden ladder to the attic creaked. I tiptoed to avoid the third loose board, which was left over from the roof repair 3 years ago. Marta always said, "Don't step on it. It will disturb the pigeons in the beams." The dusty camphor wood box was in the corner. I used my sleeve to wipe the cobwebs off the lock, and the metal buckle popped open with a click. The phone vibrated at this moment. I picked up Jane's number. Her voice was like a knife through the rain. "We got your email. Interpol has frozen Lucien's account, and we just searched Claire's apartment. What did you find?" I opened the lid of the box, and a musty smell came out. "There's an account book in the safe." She paused for 2 seconds. "Van Doren's name is on the first page of the list of buyers." I paused. The corner of the yellowed photo pressed at the bottom of the box was exposed. In the photo, Marta was wearing a red dress, and a man wearing sunglasses was standing next to her. Was that the one she saw in Malaga 3 years ago, or earlier? And Jane's voice dropped. "Van Doren tried to destroy the medical records tonight, which triggered the hospital's automatic backup. I checked his cloud logs. Ellery, your amnesia is not an accident." The rain suddenly got heavier. The skylight in the attic was leaking air, and I stared at the outline of the man in the photo, feeling a chill on the back of my neck. I didn't hear what Jane was saying next. There was a line of small words on the back of the photo, written in red pen. "To Miguel, may the wind always blow in the direction of justice." Miguel, is that my old name? I'm in the attic of the B&B. I interrupted her. "Jane, come here." After hanging up the phone, I continued to rummage through the box. Forged passports, copies of cross-border remittance slips, and a stack of documents stamped confidential. The recipient on the remittance slips is always LM. The timeline starts 2 years ago. The most recent one was 3 months ago, and the amount is 2 million euros. Boom. There was a sound of a door lock turning downstairs. I froze in place, and the wooden ladder to the attic suddenly groaned as if it could not bear the weight. "Ellery?" It was Jane's voice, cold and wet with rain. I grabbed the photos and the money order and rushed downstairs. She stood in the living room, her police jacket dripping with water, holding an evidence bag in her hand. Inside was a hardcover notebook with Claire Devine personal accounts printed on the cover. "Look at this." She flipped open the account book and stopped at a certain page. On the day of Lucien's car accident, Claire remitted 100,000 euros to the Van Doren clinic. My throat tightened. The man in sunglasses in the photo suddenly moved in my memory. He patted my shoulder and said, "Miguel, only you can complete this mission." Then there was the sound of sudden brakes, glass breaking, and the last scene before the blood blurred my eyes. Claire squatted outside the car, holding up her mobile phone to take a video. 3 months ago, I heard myself say, "Lucien figured out my identity. He didn't kill me. He made me disappear." Jane looked up, the police badge flashing in the rainy night. "I created a car accident, faked amnesia, and then made you a scapegoat." I nodded. The camphor wood box in the attic was still open, with half the corner of a passport exposed at the bottom. The cover was dark green, with Miguel Rodriguez written in gold-plated font. The sound of rain gradually subsided. Jane's phone rang. She picked it up and raised her eyebrows at me. Interpol confirmed the remittance order. The 2 million in your account was the hush money that Lucien used to shut you up. I reached for the encrypted USB drive in my pocket. Some truth should be revealed, and the passport in the box in the attic, and the document underneath it with my real identity were waiting to be opened. I slammed the forged passport on the wooden table in the kitchen. A patch of paint had been rubbed off the dark green gold embossed Miguel Rodriguez on the cover. The remittance slips taken out from the camphor wood box were scattered all over the table. The payees were all LM. The date of the most recent remittance of 2 million euros was 3 months ago, which was exactly the day when I lost my memory in a car accident. The image of glass shards piercing my eyelids suddenly came to my mind. I gripped the edge of the table and gasped for breath. Lucien's Rolls-Royce hit us at that time. I was sitting in the passenger seat and was thrown out, breaking the car window. At the last second I glanced outside the car. Claire was holding up her mobile phone, and the camera was facing my bleeding face. "They want me to disappear," I said to the air. My fingers unconsciously stroked the words written in red pen on the back of the photo. To Miguel, may the wind always blow towards justice. It was Marta's handwriting. The old Spanish landlord always liked to use this fancy pen. Jane's footsteps were heard in the attic. She held up an evidence bag, the words Claire Devine's personal account smudged by the rain on the cover. "Look here." She flipped open the account book and pointed at a line of transfer records with her fingernails. On the day Lucien had the car accident, 100,000 euros were transferred to the Van Doren clinic. My throat tightened. The man who patted my shoulder and said only you can complete the mission suddenly became clear in my memory. He was the liaison officer of Interpol. 3 months ago in the monitoring room of a Vancouver bank, Lucien put a gun to the back of my waist, and my shadow was stretched out in the monitoring screen. "Come with me," he said. "You can either die or be a scapegoat." Jane's cell phone rang. She listened to a few words and turned the screen to me. "Interpol has confirmed that the 2 million in your account is the hush money given by Lucien." I took out the encrypted USB flash drive from my pocket, which contained the surveillance video of the Vancouver bank. It was secretly filmed when I was an informant, and the entire flow of funds of Lucien's smuggling group was in it. "I need a map." I turned around and looked through the drawer. Amsterdam, Malaga, Vancouver. These 3 points should be their smuggling routes. Jane pulled out a crumpled world map from her briefcase. I grabbed a red pen and circled it. The homestay in Malaga is the contact point. The bank account in Vancouver is used for money laundering, and the jewelry store in Amsterdam is a front. The pen stopped at the port of Rotterdam. There may also be a shipping terminal. Jane's intercom suddenly rang. "Detective Hawke, the Van Doren clinic is under control." She grabbed her coat and walked out. "I'll check his medical records. You continue to sort out the clues." The door slammed shut, and I heard her say in the stairwell, "The technical team is preparing to crack the encrypted file." The kitchen clock went off for 20 minutes. I opened a letter from Marta, and a faded stamp fell out of the yellowed paper. The postmark date was 3 years ago. At the end of the letter, it was written in pencil, "There is something in the secret compartment of the old clock in the attic." I rushed back to the attic, lifted the back panel of the clock, and found a recorder in the metal box. I pressed the play button, and Marta's voice with a Spanish accent came out. "Miguel, the code you hid on the back of the old photo is the number of annual rings of the olive tree." I grabbed the old photo on the dressing table. It was a photo of Marta and I in the sunny courtyard, and a string of numbers was carved on the back with a knife. Following the instructions in the recorder, I counted the growth rings of the olive tree in the corner of the photo. There were 19 of them. The phone vibrated in my pocket. Isabel Chen's name popped up, and the Canadian bank's security chief's voice was like a machine gun. "The account key you want has been unlocked. The last transfer was 3 hours ago. 20 million euros were transferred to the Dutch Anonymous Trust Fund." I held the photo tightly. Lucien's smuggling network was about to transfer funds. Ding! A text message popped up on the phone. The number was unknown. The link automatically jumps to the real-time monitoring screen of Van Doren Clinic. In the picture, a man in a black coat was stuffing documents into a shredder. The roar of the shredder drowned out his curses. "Is that bitch Claire gonna run away?" I grabbed a USB drive and rushed downstairs. When I started the old Ford in the B&B, I felt a chill on the back of my neck. In the rearview mirror, the high beam of the black SUV suddenly lit up, and the license plate was covered with a black cloth. Fuck. I stepped on the gas. The SUV caught up with me and hit my right rear wheel hard with the front of the car. The Ford tilted to the side of the road. I turned the steering wheel and hit the curb, the tires scraping the ground and white smoke coming out. The SUV hit me again, this time directly on the rear end. I fell forward and hit my forehead on the steering wheel. The phone vibrated on the passenger seat, indicating that it was a call from Jane. I grabbed it and put it to my ear, and only had time to shout, "Jane, someone in the clinic is destroying evidence." The words were cut off by the sound of brakes. The SUV blocked my lane, and I swerved into the alley, the car body squeaking as it scraped against the wall. The high beam in the rearview mirror was finally thrown off. I wiped the blood off my face. The USB drive on the passenger seat was still hot. Turn right at the next intersection and you will reach the police station. Jane's police car should still be parked in the same place. The rain started to get heavier again. The wipers were swinging frantically, and I stepped on the accelerator, the roar of the engine drowning out the sound of my heartbeat. When I broke open the glass door of the police station, the female police officer at the front desk had blood splattered all over her face. "Where is Jane Hawk?" I wiped my forehead, and the blood clotted between my fingers. The back of my neck still hurts, and the red marks left by the seatbelt when the SUV hit me are burning. Crime squad on the 3rd floor. The policewoman stared at the USB flash drive on my chest, which was leaking out from my blood-soaked shirt. I rushed upstairs and Jane's office door was open. She was sorting the evidence bags in the Lucian case with her head down. She looked up when she heard the noise and her pen fell onto the file with a pop. "Ellery?" She walked around the table and reached out to help me, but stopped in midair. I was covered in mud and blood, as if I had just been pulled out of a quagmire. I slammed my phone on her desk. The screen was on, and the surveillance footage of the anonymous text message was still stopped in front of the shredder at the Van Doren clinic. Someone sent me the real-time surveillance of the clinic. I pulled out the USB drive. The key to the Canadian bank is in it. 20 million was transferred to the Dutch trust fund 3 hours ago. Jane's fingers tapped rapidly on the keyboard. "Technical department," she said into the phone. "Trace the source of this text message now." I took out my recorder. Marta's voice was mixed with the sound of electricity. "Miguel, the code you hid on the back of the old photo is the number of annual rings of the olive tree." Jane's eyebrows jumped. Miguel was my alias when I was an informant, and only a few people in the bureau knew it. "The source of the signal has been located." The technical department's voice exploded from the speakerphone. Van Doren's private encrypted server. The tip of Jane's pen made an indentation on the table. "He's destroying evidence." She looked up suddenly. "We need to lure him out." Half an hour later, Jane's phone lit up. She typed on the screen, her fingertips moving as fast as if she were tap dancing. I contacted him using an anonymous account and said I had a copy of the unpublished account book. She turned her phone towards me, and on the screen was a message she had just sent. 2 million euros for the last piece of the puzzle of Lucian's smuggling network. Will he believe it? I moved my Adam's apple. He had no choice. Jane tore off the police badge and stuffed it into the drawer. "The transfer of funds from the trust fund 3 hours ago means they are withdrawing." She took out a black hoodie and threw it to me. "Put this on. You will be the seller's assistant later." Abandoned warehouse by the canal. The rain stopped, and the air was filled with the smell of rotting waterweed. I huddled in the shadows and watched Jane walk into the warehouse in her high heels, her ponytail swinging in a dark arc behind her neck. She was carrying a silver briefcase, which contained fake account books and a tiny camera. Van Doren's car arrived. He was wearing a dark gray suit and a silver-blue striped tie, as if he were attending a charity dinner. 2 big guys got out of the passenger seat. One of them had a scar on his ear, and his waist bulged when he walked. He was carrying a gun. "Where's the account book?" Van Doren's voice was as sweet as honey. I heard the seller was an old friend. He glanced at me. and his eyes behind the glasses suddenly narrowed. Ellery West. Jane opened the briefcase, and the cover of the fake account book glowed coldly. He's an assistant. Her voice was as cold as ice. Inspect the goods first. Van Doren didn't answer. He took a step towards me, and his leather shoes made a crisp sound on the broken glass. You thought you got your memory back? His voice suddenly lowered, like a poisonous snake spitting out its tongue. That's just the version I made you believe. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his suit pocket. The cover read, Memory Intervention Experiment Report, and my name was at the top of the first page. Your memory of self-defense counterattack was implanted by me using suggestion therapy. The real you. Bang. Gunshots rang out. The scarred man pointed his gun at Jane, and the bullet grazed her temple and lodged into the wall. I rushed over and pushed Jane away, and my lower back hit the iron barrel hard. Another thug rushed over and punched me in the face with a loud bang. I ducked my head and rammed my elbow into his ribs. The action was so familiar, like an instinct ingrained in my bones. Police. Don't move. Jane's voice cut through the chaos. Plainclothes police officers poured out from all sides of the warehouse, and the white light from their tactical flashlights was so blinding. The scarred man's gun was confiscated, and the other thug curled up on the ground holding his stomach. Van Doren ran towards the door, and suddenly a flower of blood burst out on his leg. The sniper was on the opposite roof. He fell into the mud and water, still laughing and saying, "Do you think you can defeat them? They are everywhere." I squatted down and a note fell out of his suit pocket, written crookedly on it were. I clutched the note tightly. All the key transactions in Lucien's ledger were marked with similar numbers. On the way back to the police station, Jane's cell phone rang. She turned on the speakerphone and heard the voice from the intelligence department. HR is our code system. This code belongs to internal personnel. I stared at the rain streaks on the car window. The street light shone through the glass, stretching the two letters, HR, out like two black shadows. As Jane pulled up to the police station, her pager went off again. Intelligence Officer Hans Ruiz. She glanced down. He said he was going to assist in the investigation of the Van Doren case. I touched the note in my pocket. HR, it's raining again. When I followed Jane into the police station, the back of my neck was still covered in mud from the warehouse. The rain dripped down the brim of the hat onto the collar of the police uniform, and Jane's epaulettes were soaked and became soft. Hans is waiting in the interrogation room. The police officer at the front desk handed over 2 cups of hot cocoa with the police station's mascot printed on them. A puffin wearing a police hat. I stared at the puffin and suddenly remembered the wood carving at the entrance of the B&B, which was also round like this. The door of the interrogation room was ajar, and Hans's back could be seen. He was wearing a crisp suit and his hair had salon-style curls on the ends. Hearing the footsteps, he turned around and smiled, revealing his 2 fangs. "Mr. West, I have heard of your name for a long time." He held out his hand for a handshake, and I pulled back. Jane stepped in between them and said, "Intelligence Officer Ruiz, Van Doren's interrogation records are on my desk. No hurry." Hans took out a mint from his pocket. I'd rather hear the amnesiac's own words. When he said self-narration, the ending tone rose. I stared at the police badge on his tie, and suddenly remembered that when Van Doren fell in the mud, there was a similar dark pattern on the lining of his suit. It was not a custom-made style for the police station, but the logo of a Swiss handmade tailor shop. "I'll go get the information." Jane turned and left. Hans took 2 steps and stood at the door of the interrogation room. The tip of his leather shoes scraped the ground and stopped 10 centimeters away from the door. "What are you waiting for?" I asked. He didn't answer and looked down at his watch. The second hand turned 3 times before he patted my shoulder and said, "Young man, having a bad memory is a problem." After he left, Jane rushed over from the end of the corridor, holding a piece of A4 paper in her hand. Entry and exit records. The red stamp on the paper hasn't dried yet. Hans Ruiz has flown to Zurich 21 times in the past 3 years. The most recent one was on July 17th, 2 days earlier than the server 19 on the note. Switzerland. I took out the note from my pocket. A recorder from Malaga. Jane's eyes lit up. You said there was a recorder among the old things Marta gave you? As I ran back to the B&B, the rain started to fall, even harder. The wooden carved oak in the entrance hall swayed in the wind. I squatted in front of the old oak cabinet and took out the faded iron box. The recorder was at the bottom, and its battery had long been dead. I plugged it in and pressed play. See you in Zurich on July 9th. A hoarse male voice suddenly rang out. My hands shook, and the recorder fell to the ground. There was another half sentence at the end. Let Ruiz keep an eye on it and make sure nothing goes wrong. It was Lucien's voice. I grabbed my phone and called Jane. 0719 is the meeting in Zurich. The smuggling gang and the buyers are meeting. Jane was typing on the phone. I will apply for Interpol cooperation right now. Before hanging up, she added, the ferry Claire was on has been located. It's the Herring Gull, and it's heading to Belgium. On the deck of the Herring Gull, Claire pulled her scarf closer to her face. She squatted in the corner of the cabin and used her fingernails to dig open the secret compartment under the seat. The micro USB drive was covered in dust, so she wiped it with her sleeve and stuffed it into her bra. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, but the screen was black. No signal. Damn it. She kicked the chair. Hearing the cry of a child coming from the next cabin, she bit her lip and retreated to the porthole. The raindrops hit the glass, like someone scratching it with fingernails. Jane's car stopped downstairs of the intelligence office with the wipers running fast. She put on her gun and nodded at me. Follow closely. Hans's office door was locked. Jane took out the master key from her bag and unlocked it in 3 seconds. The safe is under the desk. Jane pried it with a pen, and I helped pull it. With a click, a stack of documents slid out. At the top was the psychological intervention agreement. Party A was Lucien Murdoch. Party B was Van Doren, and the guarantor's signature was written in a flamboyant style. It was Hans Ruiz. Jane took a deep breath and clicked on the USB drive in the file. As the video loaded, I saw a world map in the background, with the nodes of Amsterdam, Malaga, and Vancouver circled in red. The screen lit up. Lucien sat in the leather chair, and Hans stood behind him. How is West's memory being processed? Dr. Farn said that he has to think about his name for a long time now. Lucien smiled. Once he takes the blame for the murder, the Swiss account will be safe. The meeting on July 19th. Keep an eye on it, and don't let the buyer run away. The video suddenly went black. Jane's phone rang. It was a message from Interpol. The meeting point in Zurich has been locked and the task force has been deployed.
When I returned to the B&B, the table lamp in the living room was on.
An email from Marta flashed on the computer, titled, Caution. After clicking it, there was only one line of text. They know you have recovered your memory and want to silence you. There was the sound of a car braking outside the window. I stood up suddenly, and the chair fell to the ground. The sound of rain was mixed with the sound of footsteps, coming from far away. I rushed over and turned off all the lights. In the darkness, the outline of the wooden oak blurred into a blur. The footsteps downstairs stopped and someone knocked on the door. Mr. West. It was the food delivery guy. I breathed a sigh of relief, but my hands were still shaking. The blue light of the computer screen illuminated Marta's email. I was staring at the word silence when I heard a noise in the attic, like someone stepping on an old wooden beam. The rain is still falling. I stared at the word silence on the computer screen, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was another slight sound of a wooden beam breaking in the attic, as if someone was crouching down and moving downstairs. My right hand reached to my lower back. The old Swiss Army knife was still there. I just stuffed it in when I was repairing the window frame of the B&B last month. The blade has a chip on it, but it's better than using bare hands. Turn off all the lights first. The table lamp in the living room. The wall lamp in the corridor. The induction light at the corner of the stairs, leaving only the faint blue light of the computer screen in the darkness. Then I rushed into the basement. The concrete steps were very slippery from the rain. I jumped down holding the wall. My knees hit the stone tiles and I gasped in pain. The safe is behind the wine cabinet. The password is 2019-0315. Marta said that was the day I first went to Malaga to help her repair the roof. The metal turntable was spinning so fast that it took the third turn to get it right. I stuffed the USB drive, the surveillance screenshots Jane gave me, and Van Doren's medical records into it. When it was locked, I heard a click, just like putting a lock on my heart. The phone vibrated in my pocket. It was the prompt sound of the encryption software, and Isabel's avatar was flashing. She is the security supervisor of a Vancouver bank. 3 months ago, I sent her an email using the Puffin B&B email address, saying please help me store some things when needed. The backup files are in the basement safe. I typed quickly. Please transfer them to your secure server and label them West Truth. Just as I pressed the send button, a car light suddenly flashed outside the window. I hunched over the window glass. The black Volkswagen on the corner had been parked for 10 minutes, and the wipers were moving so slowly that it seemed like they were counting seconds. Most of the license plate was covered with mud, and only the beginning NL5 was visible. Taxis around here don't have such peeling paint. The noise in the attic stopped. I grabbed my coat and rushed out the door. The rain hit my face, and it hurt. I ran to the left along the alley, turned into a convenience store to buy a cup of hot cocoa, and then went around to the bus stop. As soon as the number 23 bus arrived at the station, I squeezed on and sat in the second to last row. Through the blurry car window, I saw a man in a black jacket flash past the convenience store door, his hat brim pulled down low, and something reflective in his hand. A message from Jane popped up on the phone. An anonymous tip said someone will clean up the witnesses tonight and check the surveillance cameras near your home. The accompanying picture is a close-up of the Volkswagen license plate, with the words Registrant Marco Rossi, died in a gunfight between drug dealers in 2021. Technical department tracked the GPS. Jane's next message said with the location, the target is at the abandoned dock on the south bank. I clutched my phone tightly. When I was undercover 7 years ago, I saw too many dirty cars with disguised identities, registered in the names of dead people and burned after use. What they want is not my life, but the things I hide. A status was posted on social media. Some memories are more terrifying than death. The accompanying picture was a silhouette of an old passport, with the Malaga customs stamp in the upper right corner still clearly visible. Roland Bremer's account reposted it half an hour later, with the caption, "Major criminal secrets yet to be revealed. This reporter is always squatting outside the police station to get news, and I deliberately left out half of Lucien's smuggling bill for him last week." At 10 o'clock in the evening, I wandered into a 24-hour cafe in the city center. I ordered a cup of black coffee, sat by the window, and stared at my own reflection in the glass. In the rain and fog, 2 men in baseball caps crossed the road. One of them touched the back of his waist. It was in the shape of a holster. They didn't follow up. I counted to the 10th taxi and got into one with a green license plate. The driver was an old man in a flowered shirt. I told him the address of my homestay, and he looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You're going home so late." I forgot to turn off the gas. When the car stopped at the alley, the rain had eased a little. I didn't rush upstairs, but went around to the backyard and climbed up the old apricot tree. The window of the study on the second floor was slightly open. It was clearly closed during the day. The phone vibrated, and Jane sent a video link. In the video, 2 men wearing rubber gloves are rummaging through the bookshelves in the study. One is knocking on the wall to find a secret compartment. while the other is sticking a miniature eavesdropping device under the desk. The cameras were installed this morning. Jane's voice was electric, and they didn't find the safe. I jumped back to the ground and walked towards the dock. The rain was above my ankles. The iron gate of the dock was half open, and the sound of metal colliding could be heard from inside. Sirens blasted from behind. Jane's police uniform was soaked by rain, and she rushed to the front with a gun in hand. The two men tried to escape through the back door, but were pinned into the mud by SWAT. One of them had blood oozing from his right shoulder, and a knife had fallen at his feet, with rust on the blade, matching the knife marks at the scene where Lucien was murdered. Hans Ruiz asked us to come. He yelled so loudly that the veins in his neck jumped. The Swiss buyer must clean up the transaction chain. Ellery, Van Dor and Claire, all must die. They are afraid that Lucien's money laundering account will be investigated. Jane's pen was scratching rapidly on her notebook. I stood in the rain, listening to him say, Swiss account and meeting on July 19th, and suddenly remembered the conversation between Lucien and Hans in the video. It turned out that what they were afraid of was not that I would take the blame, but that I would be alive. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Jane sent the interrogation records to Interpol. I squatted at the door of her office, watching her typing on the computer, the blue light from the screen reflecting the dark circles under her eyes. Did the confession mention the code name of the Swiss buyer? She shook her head, and a mouse hovered over the submit button. But they said that Ruiz will go to Zurich in the next 2 days. The rain has stopped. The sky outside the window was bluish-gray, like a piece of unclean glass. Jane's phone lit up, and it was a reply from Interpol. Secret surveillance has been arranged. I took out the wooden carved puffin from my pocket. It was a gift from Marta. My fingertips rubbed the curve of the bird's beak, and I suddenly remembered the red roofs in the flashback. The sunshine in Malaga must have penetrated the roofs, but at this moment, the wind in Amsterdam still carries the smell of blood and rust. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Jane's coffee cup made a crisp sound on the table. I squatted at the door of her office and watched her rub her sore eyes, and finally click submit with the mouse. Interpol has responded. She turned the phone towards me, and on the screen there was a line of English. Secret surveillance has been arranged in Zurich. I took out the wooden carved puffin from my pocket, and the patterns carved by Marta felt against my palm. Swiss account, I whispered. Lucien's account book always has Valkyr Trust. Jane's fingers paused on the keyboard. Vancouver Bank transfer records. I nodded. Half an hour ago, I sent a message to Isabelle Chen. She was the security director of the Bank of Canada. I had contacted her 3 months ago as a B&B owner, although now I only remember her voice as like an ice pick knocking on glass. 10 minutes ago, she sent me Lucien's transfer details for the past 6 months. I took out my phone and turned to the last page. Every large amount of money eventually flows into this trust fund. Jane leaned closer to the screen, her pupils shrinking. An offshore account in Switzerland used to launder the smuggled jewelry money. When the office door was pushed open, the wind blew in the smell of rust. Alison Gray stood at the door, her black windbreaker stained with raindrops, the police badge on her collar flashing coldly. Detective Hawke, Mr. West. I am the Interpol liaison officer, responsible for cross-border coordination. She slammed her tablet on the table. On the screen was a 3D model of a glass building in Zurich. The Valkyrie Trust is headquartered here. Our people, disguised as cleaners, will have monitoring equipment installed in the top floor conference room by 6 this morning. But you can only act as consultants. She glanced at Jane and me. The Swiss police must maintain their operational independence. You cannot directly interfere with the arrest. Jane put her knuckles to her chin. When do we do it? Wait for them to have a meeting. Alison pulled up a surveillance screenshot, showing a man in a suit entering the building through a side door. Ruiz flew to Zurich yesterday. His supervisor may show up as well. I stared at the man's right ear in the screenshot. There was a cinnabar mole there. This face appeared in my flashback. On a rainy night, he pointed a gun at me and shouted, "Miguel, you won't survive the night." "Miguel," I blurt out. Allison paused with her pen. "Who?" Jane answered for me. His informant code name before he lost his memory. Allison's eyes were like knives. "It seems that you know more than we do." Roland Bremer's call came at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He is a reporter with a keener sense of smell than a hound. Last time, in order to uncover a smuggling case, he squatted in the trash can of my homestay for 3 days. "There's a private dinner tonight for the Swiss financial community." His voice trembled with excitement. "I got an invitation. Do you want to go?" I walked to the window holding my phone. The clouds over Amsterdam were very low. "Why are you helping me?" "Because if you die, there won't be any headlines." He laughed. "The venue is at the Zurich Lakeside Hotel, 7 o'clock. Remember to wear a suit. Don't ask me how I got it. I stole a banker's jacket." The crystal chandeliers in the banquet hall were dazzling. Holding a glass of champagne, I walked among the crowd of people wearing tailor-made suits. The art consultant Roland mentioned was sitting at the bar. The pearl necklace made her neck look white, and her badge was printed with Katrina Murdoch, Lucien's distant cousin, and the signature of the financial agent in the account book. "This wine is too sweet." I leaned over. "What do you think?" She turned her face to the side, the smell of perfume wrapped in tobacco. "I prefer single malt." I pretended to stumble, and the glass knocked against her wrist. As she frowned and wiped her sleeves, I glanced at her phone screensaver. A photo of Lucien with the revolving door of the Vancouver bank in the background. "The weather on July 19 should be good," she said suddenly, looking down at her brooch. "A closed-door meeting by Lake Zurich is the best place to discuss business." My heart was beating against my ribs. Using the excuse of going to the restroom, I hid in the cubicle and took a picture of her badge. The photo was sent back to Jane's phone, which replied 3 seconds later. Confirmed identity. Lucien's financial agent, involved in 5 cross-border transfers. At 10 o'clock that evening, Jane and I were crouched in the fire escape of the Valkyrie Trust building. She was wearing a maintenance worker's blue work clothes, and I was holding a toolbox. My gloves were full of sweat. "The ventilation duct is on the 3rd floor." She pointed to the ceiling. "It's a surveillance blind spot. Allison's people have cut off the cameras on this floor." I stepped on her shoulders and climbed into the pipe. The metal walls were freezing cold. When Jane followed in, the pipe made a muffled sound and I quickly covered her mouth. Footsteps were heard below. "Maintenance department." The security guard's voice was close. "No work allowed after 10 o'clock. Jane's breath sprayed on the back of my hand. "The water pipe is leaking." The manager specially approved it. The footsteps faded away. We crouched and moved forward until we heard voices overhead. Ruiz screwed up. It was a deep male voice with a Nordic accent. "That Miguel must be dealt with. Van Doren's memory tampering has loopholes, and Claire's perjury is not safe." Another voice was hoarse. "But he is tied to the detective now, so we need a cleaner method." The male voice interrupted him. "Let the people in Brussels prepare tomorrow." I squeezed Jane's wrist. She took out a micro recorder, and the red light flashed in the darkness. "August von Reinhardt." Jane's lips were almost next to my ear. "The heir to an arms family. Interpol has been pursuing him for 5 years. Suddenly sirens sounded downstairs. There was a sound of banging on the door outside the pipe, and someone shouted Interpol, "Don't move. Go through the underground passage." August's voice was filled with a sneer. "This is not the end. It's just a step on the chessboard." The footsteps faded away. When Jane and I climbed out of the pipe, the conference room was empty. There was a crumpled piece of paper on the table, and I picked it up. It was written in German. "Brussels, behind the old town hall. Lock of time, watch shop." Jane's phone lights up with a message from Allison. The target has escaped and all exits in Zurich have been blocked. I folded the paper into small pieces and stuffed them into the wings of the wooden puffins. Outside the window, in the night of Zurich, there is a smell of rain. Brussels, Jane said. Ticket for tomorrow. I touched the cool wooden body of the puffin and thought of August's last words. A move on the chessboard. The next step is our turn. I wrinkled the paper. Jane's fingertips tapped quickly on the screen of her mobile phone. At 3 o'clock in the morning at Zurich train station, we crowded in front of the ticket machine, and she bought the earliest ticket to Brussels. It's in the alley behind the old town hall. She handed me the ticket. The map shows that the store is at the end of the cobblestone road, with a bronze bell hanging on the door. The train jolted for 3 hours. I stared out the window at the receding wheat fields, and the wooden puffin was digging its thigh into its pocket. The note I picked up that night in Zurich was hidden in its wing. Jane's police badge was pinned to her waist, gently hitting the metal handrail as the train bumped along. It was snowing lightly in Brussels. The stone slabs in the back alley were shining from the cold. We walked around the waffle stall and saw the bronze bell of the Lock of Time at the 7th intersection. The door was dark brown, with the paint peeling off to reveal the wood grain underneath, like an old scar. When I opened the door, the hot air from the heater and the smell of engine oil rushed towards me. There was a white-haired old man sitting behind the counter, repairing a clock with his head bent. He didn't even look up until the magnifying glass slid to the tip of his nose. Jane showed his ID. "We are looking for Lucien Murdoch's communication station." The old man's tweezers fell to the table with a thud. He raised his eyes, and his cloudy pupils suddenly focused on my face. "Who are you?" I took out the old photo that Marta sent me, a group photo in a Spanish B&B. I was standing under the red roof, with the old landlord in a floral dress next to me. The old man's hands began to shake. He stretched out his dry branch-like fingers, and gently touched the corner of the photo. "Guardian of time." His voice was as light as a sigh. "Lucien said that if someone brings this photo to him one day, it will be the person he chooses." He fished out a brass key from under the counter. The teeth of the key were engraved with twisted vine patterns. "The 3rd floor tile in the basement. Pry it up." Jane pulled out a tactical flashlight and swept a beam across the wall of clock parts. The steps in the basement had a pungent smell of mold. There was a thin crack on the edge of the 3rd floor tile. I pried it with the tip of the key, and with a click, the tile sank in. The secret room was smaller than expected. There was a metal cabinet against the wall, and the ceiling was covered with dust. Jane put on rubber gloves and opened the drawer. Stacks of documents fell to the concrete floor. Smuggling route maps, bank statements, and bloody jewelry appraisal certificates. At the bottom is an old camera with a tape label that reads 2023-08-15. Warehouse confrontation. I pressed play. The screen flickered twice, and Lucien's face appeared on the screen. His eyes were red and he held a gun in his hand. In the background was the iron rack of the warehouse, with sealed wooden boxes stacked on top. "If you see this, it means I'm dead." His voice trembled. 3 months ago, in Vancouver, you rushed into the warehouse with a police badge, saying you were going to shut down the entire network. I was scared, so I had someone stage a car accident and changed your face. Ellery West is a fake, Miguel Rodriguez is you. With a click, the tape suddenly got stuck. Jane pulled out another drawer, inside of which lay a letter, the edges of the paper charred, as if it had been snatched from a fire. "I gave you a chance to be reborn." Lucien's handwriting was crooked. "Now, use these things to let the truth come to light." My hands were shaking as I held the letter. Jane's phone suddenly rang. It was Roland's news link. In the video, Claire stood at the border station, with her coat collar standing up high. But she was saying, "I have been in charge of Lucien's account for 3 years. August people transferred 3 million every month. That guy Bremer." Jane sneered. "He's been following her for 3 days." At the end of the video, Claire noticed the camera, screamed and rushed over, and the screen went black. We returned to Amsterdam with a box full of evidence. The lights in the prosecutor's office were on all night. Jane slapped the documents on the table one by one. Van Doren's medical records have been tampered with, and Claire's transfer slip has her signature. The closing press conference is scheduled for Friday morning. Jane stood on the stage in her police uniform, the spotlight so bright that I couldn't open my eyes. A reporter asked, "Will the fact that August hasn't been caught yet affect the closure of the case?" Jane's voice was steady. "Justice may be late, but..." My phone vibrated in my pocket.
Unknown number, display, unknown area.
I picked up the phone, but there was no sound from the other end, only electrical noise. Just as he was about to hang up, a male voice suddenly rang out. "Do you think you've won by locking up the warehouse and handing over the evidence? The real game has just begun." The phone is disconnected. Then, the mailbox notification sounded. The title of the encrypted email contained only 2 words, "Welcome back." By the time the press conference ended, it was already dark. I stood on the terrace of the Puffin Bed and Breakfast, with the canals of Amsterdam glowing below me. The wind lifted the collar of my shirt, and the scar from the car accident 3 months ago was still there. I was lying in the hospital at that time. Claire pretended to be a nurse and pushed medicine into my IV tube, and Van Doren read, "Your name is Ellery," at the head of the bed. It turns out it was all a play. The phone screen lit up. It was the encrypted email. I clicked decrypt, and numbers scrolled across the screen. The wind blew into my collar. I stared at the ticking numbers, and suddenly remembered the last words in Lucien's video. "Miguel, it's time to wake up." I was staring at the sender's address when the beep sounded, indicating that the email decryption was complete. That unfamiliar email address suffix reminded me of what August said in Zurich, a move on the chessboard. Now, it's my turn to take the next step. I stared at the encrypted email on my phone screen, my finger hovering over the decrypt button for 3 seconds. The email suffix is a string of garbled characters, like a deliberately crumpled piece of paper. I opened the tracking software, and the IP address jumped 7 times. Berlin, Prague, Warsaw, and finally stopped in Frankfurt. The signal disappeared in an old factory building. I checked that place, and found that it was bought by August's people 3 years ago, and converted into a warehouse. The phone was hot in my palm. I dialed Jane's number. "Now?" Her voice was filled with the exhaustion of someone who had just gotten off work. "Are you sure you want to pursue this? The press conference just ended, and the prosecution won't file the evidence until tomorrow. The subject line is 'Welcome back.'" I pressed the phone to my ear. Lucien called me Miguel in the video, and now someone is trying to contact me by that name. There was silence on the other end of the line. For 5 seconds. 10 minutes later, downstairs at the Puffin B&, when Jane came, she was holding a brown paper bag, and her hair was covered with raindrops. She slammed the bag on the table, and out slid a document marked "Destroyed" with the words "Code Name, Miguel Money Laundering Task Force," printed on the cover.
I found it in the metal cabinet at the bottom of the evidence room. She tapped the word Miguel with her fingertips. "Your true identity may be deeper than we thought."
My hands were shaking as I held the document.
In the photo on the second page, a man in plain clothes is standing in front of a customs warehouse, and his profile overlaps with me in the mirror. That's me before I lost my memory. There were suddenly 2 short knocks at the entrance. Roland stuck half of his head in, followed by a man in a black jacket with a scar on his left eye. Carl Whitman, a retired hacker from MI6. He's expensive but effective. Carl glanced at the documents on the table, and Scar's mouth twitched. "I can crack the email, but I want a copy of Lucien's smuggling account book." "Deal." I pushed the USB drive over. "I want to know who the sender is within half an hour." Carl's fingers flew across the keyboard, and green code popped up on the screen. Jane stood behind him, her eyes running over the action log I had just compiled. The red roof in Malaga, the safe in Vancouver, and the knife Lucien had held when he chased me into the warehouse. "Found it."
Carl suddenly stopped. There's an audio clip hidden in the email attachment. The encryption method is the same as the one used in the Watchmaker mission 3 years ago. I pressed play. Amid the noise of electricity, a mechanically altered male voice said, "The time is up. The Watchmaker is online." Blood rushed to his temples. The Watchmaker. This was the alias I used when I was a bed and breakfast owner in Malaga, to get close to informants in the smuggling gangs. The package sent by Marta arrived that afternoon. The craft paper was wrinkled by the rain, and a hard-cover diary fell out of it. The cover was printed with sunny courtyard. The photo was clipped on page 73 of the diary, and the edges of the yellowed photo paper were curled. I stood in Brussels' Grand Place with a man wearing black gloves, with the famous astronomical clock in the background. His profile was like a knife, and he was 70% similar to Lucien. It was Jacob Murdoch, Lucien's younger brother, who according to police records died in a yacht explosion 3 years ago. Written in pencil on the back of the photo, "When you hear the sound of the pendulum, that's when we'll be reunited." I turned to the last page of the diary. Marta wrote in a crooked handwriting, "Miguel, they thought you were dead, but I knew you would wake up." Jacob said that the secret of the astronomical clock is in the gears that tell the time on the hour. Suddenly a car horn sounded downstairs. I leaned on the window and looked down. A black car stopped at the door of the B&B, and the window slowly lowered. Isabel Chen's face was revealed. She took off her sunglasses and the mole at the corner of her eye shone under the street light. "Get in the car." She patted the passenger seat. "You are not the only one who is being resurrected. I am also part of the Watchmaker." I grabbed my coat and rushed downstairs. As Isabel stepped on the accelerator, I caught a glimpse of the photo of the astronomical clock slipping from her pocket to the ground. In the photo, Jacob's finger, under his black glove, was pointing to the 12 on the clock dial. "Where are we going?" I gripped the car door handle. She glanced at the navigation, and the corners of her mouth raised a little. "Grand Place, Brussels." The wind blew in through the car window, and I touched a scar on the back of my neck left by the car accident.
On a rainy night 3 years ago, Lucien held a knife and shouted, "Miguel, die!" In the ward 3 months ago, when Claire was pushing medicine into the infusion tube, Van Doren was saying, "Your name is Ellery."
Now the sound of the astronomical clock suddenly rang in my memory. Tick. It's time to wake up. I counted the rain streaks on the windshield as Isabel's car rolled over the cobblestones of Brussels. She slowed down the car, and the wipers drew a semi-arc with a squeaking sound. The third step, near the base of the astronomical clock. "Are you sure?" I reached for the tool in my coat pocket. The miniature crowbar Carl had stuffed into my hand was still warm from his body. On page 73 of the diary that Marta sent you, there are cracks on the edge of the photo. She turned the steering wheel with one hand. It's exactly the same as what I saw in the bank surveillance 3 years ago. The rain is getting heavier. The spire of the astronomical clock looked like a rusty knife in the rain. My heel slipped when I jumped out of the car, and the moment I grabbed the handrail of the steps, my fingertips touched an indentation, exactly the same place where Jacob's black gloves pointed in the photo. The third step. I squatted down and dug my fingernails into the cracks between the tiles. The stone bricks were looser than expected, and they made a clicking sound when pried gently. The smell of damp earth came up, and a pocket watch wrapped in oilcloth rolled out. The surface of the copper shell is bumpy and has the letters TM engraved on it. I wiped the mud off with my sleeve, and the coolness of the metal penetrated through my skin and into my bones. Turn it to midnight. Isabel stood behind me holding an umbrella. Marta said that the secret of the gears is telling time on the hour. The hand stopped at 3:15. I held my breath and turned the minute hand. When it reached the 12 position, the watch cover popped open with a click. It was not a dial, but a secret compartment. A chip the size of a fingernail was stuck inside, reflecting the light of raindrops. "This is the activation key for the Watchmaker." Isabel's voice suddenly softened. 3 years ago, when Lucien asked me to crack the bank system, he mentioned that only an informant could activate it. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Carl's voice popped up, with an electric noise. Ellery, the chip has been decoded.
Inside is a global abnormal transaction map with 27 money laundering nodes marked. Pause for 2 seconds. The last one is the Liechtenstein Star Trust, headed by Jacob Murdoch.
I squeezed the chip until my knuckles turned white. According to police files, Jacob died in a plane crash 3 years ago, but in the photo he was standing in the Grand Place in Brussels, with his finger under his black glove, clearly pointing to today. We're going to Liechtenstein now. Isabel shook the water off her umbrella. They have 2 hours left to transfer the last sum of funds. Our shadows were reflected in the glass door of the trust company. I was wearing a blue maintenance worker's uniform. She was wearing a baseball cap, and the tool bag was heavy on her shoulders. The security guard at the front desk glanced at our work ID cards and waved to let us in. The safe is on the second underground floor. The combination lock was an old-fashioned turntable. Isabel fished out a note. Carl said that Lucien's birthday should be entered backwards. 5397. The moment the turntable stopped, the metal door made a muffled sound. At the deepest part of the fuse rack, there is an iron box with 1980-11-23, sealed with tape. I tore off the tape and there lay a cassette inside. The cassette made a crackling sound when it was inserted into the machine. First there was heavy breathing, then Lucien's voice. "Jacob, if I die, let Miguel wake up. Are you sure he won't turn against us?" Another male voice, so similar to Lucien's that it gave people goosebumps. His memory was altered 7 times by Van Doren. Lucien smiled. The car accident. Ellery. Claire's fake identity. Once he finds out this, it will be just the right time to detonate the Swiss buyer's account. My hands were shaking as I held the cassette. The car accident 3 months ago was not an accident. The medicine in the IV tube was meant to consolidate the false memory. Even the name Ellery West was a label they engraved into my mind. The cell phone suddenly rang. Roland's voice message popped up, with the background of the news broadcast. Exclusive exposure. Claire Devine, the key witness in the jeweler murder case, confessed on the ferry that everything was planned by Lucien Murdoch. The Swiss buyer is speeding up the transfer. Carl's voice rose. The target account is Star Trust. It will arrive in 43 minutes. Isabel dragged me out the door. As soon as I arrived at the first floor lobby, all the ceiling lights suddenly went out. The moment the emergency lights came on, I saw the security guards stepping back with intercoms in hand, and the automatic door clicked shut. "Don't leave in such a hurry." Footsteps came from the stairwell. The man in the tailored suit took off his sunglasses and had the same fine lines at the corners of his eyes as Lucien. He rapped his knuckles on the clock on the wall. "Miguel, I've been waiting for you to wake up for 3 years." I recognized him. The man standing in the photo on the Grand Place in Brussels, his finger under his black glove, pointing to the 12 on the astronomical clock. The real legacy is in the underground secret room. He stretched out his hand to me. "Come with me, and you will understand why Lucien chose you as this chess piece." The ticking of the second hand of the wall clock suddenly became very loud. I stared at the emergency exit sign behind him and heard my heart beating like a drum. Underground chamber. World map. The rain is still falling. Jacob's leather heels tapped on the stone steps, and every step felt like a knock on my temple. As the metal door of the basement closed behind him, I heard the crisp sound of the lock tongue biting into place, overlapping with the sound of the truck that hit me 3 years ago breaking suddenly. "Look." He raised his hand and pointed to the wall. The moment the fluorescent lights came on, I gasped. The entire wall was covered with a world map, with Amsterdam, Malaga, and Vancouver circled in red. A miniature camera model was inserted into each circle, and the lines were like blood vessels running all over the paper. Lucien spent 20 years weaving this web,
Jacob's fingertips traced across the circle of Switzerland. And now it's time to change the owner. He took out a brass key from his inner pocket. The key teeth were engraved with the same gear pattern as my pocket watch. You are the last living watchmaker. He slapped the key in my palm, and the temperature was as cold as ice. Inheritance or destruction, choose. I stared at the teeth marks on the key. 3 months ago in the hospital, when the nurse pulled out the needle, I subconsciously covered the back of my hand. Van Doren said, Ellery has a history of fainting from needles, but at this moment the pain of the key piercing my palm was 10 times sharper than that of the needle. This is not needle phobia but fear. Fear of a tempered life and the fear of their identity as watchmakers. I'm not. I let go of my key, and it dropped to the floor. I'm Ellery West. Jacob smiled. The same smile Lucien had in the tape. As he bent to pick up his keys, I reached for my pocket watch. Carl said when he was debugging it for me last night. There is a micro-transmitter on the inside of the watch cover. Press the 3 o'clock mark 3 times. I tapped my thumb 3 times quickly on the case. The lights in the entire building suddenly exploded. The red light of the emergency light was so blinding that the eyes could not be opened, and a burning smell of electricity came from the vents. Jacob's face twisted in the red light, and he grabbed my arm. What did you do? The security door is unlocked. I heard Isabel's voice coming from the stairwell. She held a gun, and her tactical vest was stained with blood. Probably the injury she suffered when breaking through the security guard. Whitman hacked the power system. Now is our chance. Jacob's grip was so strong it could have crushed my bones. I shook him off and followed Isabel to the server rack at the back of the secret room. The hard drive box was sealed with a combination lock. When Isabel's tactical knife opened the lock, I caught a glimpse of a note on the bottom of the box. For Miguel Lucien. Don't look. Jacob rushed over. Isabel kicked him on the knee, and he groaned and knocked over the map stand. I grabbed the hard drive and stuffed it into my arms, then followed Isabel to the stairs. Etc. A female voice came from around the corner. Hannah Gross stood at the entrance to the fire escape holding her ID. The Olaf badge glowed coldly in the red light. I have been tracking Jacob's capital chain for half a year. She pointed to the hard drive in my arms. You have obtained the node data, but you lack key evidence. You need an active transfer record to lock all related accounts. Isabel pulled off the headset. Carl, can you fake a transfer? Is 300 million euros enough? Carl's voice was filled with electrical noise. I need 2 minutes to hack into their backup system. Jacob's roar came from behind. Don't believe her. That woman. Do it. I interrupted him. The pocket watch was hot in my pocket, like a bomb about to explode. I remembered the old letter that Marta sent me from Spain, with a photo tucked inside. A man in a plaid shirt standing at the door of a B&B, with the words Ellery West, anti-smuggling informant, written next to it. Carl's countdown sounded in the headset. 5, 4, 3. The monitoring screen suddenly lit up. Jacob stared at the transfer record on the screen. His pupils shrank into needle points. He took out his cell phone and dialed numbers frantically, then turned and ran towards the vault. Hannah said into the headset, "Attention all units, the target has entered the B1 vault." 10 minutes later, sirens pierced the ceiling. As Jacob was pinned to the ground, I saw a photograph fall out of his inside suit pocket, exactly the same one I had seen at Marta's. In the photo, 2 boys are standing under the red roofs of Malaga. One is me, and the other, that's your brother. Hannah handed over the evidence bag. He tried to destroy the data 3 years ago, and got into a car accident. They implanted his memories in you, making Ellery West the new scapegoat. I squeezed the hard drive. The metal edge hurt my palms, but it was nothing compared to the heat surging in my chest. That was real. My own heartbeat. The rain has stopped. The Amsterdam wind brought humid water vapor and blew onto the terrace of the Poffen B&B. Marta's letter was spread out on the rattan chair, the handwriting still as crooked as ever.
The old clock you repaired in Malaga finally kept time today. They say you are a prisoner, but I know you are the clock keeper. The pocket watch is in my palm. I gently turned the crown, and the hands suddenly stopped at 10:17, exactly the same time as when my brother had a car accident 3 years ago. There was a doorbell ring downstairs. "Mr. West," the girl at the front desk said, "a gentleman is looking for you." He said, "He is your brother's friend." I put the watch in my pocket. The wind lifted the letter, and the last line of words rustled. "Remember, when the pendulum stops, that's when the story really begins." I received the email when I was sorting through the old photos that Marta had just sent me. The inbox showed an anonymous address with a subject line of just 3 letters. Clark. When I hovered over the attachment, the hair on the back of my neck suddenly stood up. 3 months ago, when taking a statement at the police station, Van Doren tapped the table with his pen and said, "Memory is a piece of plasticine." The tip of the pen also had this cold, piercing touch. The attachment was an encrypted, compressed file. I sent Carl a message. "Need to decrypt." 20 minutes later, the video call came on. Carl's face was stuck in the lower right corner of the screen, with the desk piled with hard drives in the background. A photo of the Brussels astronomical clock, 0000 in the morning. The encryption method is the same as the money laundering log you gave Lucien. He tapped on the keyboard. The data packet is mixed with fragments of the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, SWIFT code, and the overlap rate with the transfer mode of the Malaga jewelry store 3 years ago is 8. I held the mouse tightly.
Lucien's smuggling network should have been eradicated long ago, but this string of code is like a snake that is not yet dead, still spitting out its tongue.
At this moment, the phone vibrated.
Isabel's message popped up. The Vancouver system screened out an abnormal transfer of 227,000 euros, which went through Luxembourg, Seychelles, and the Cayman Islands, and finally entered Schneider Asset Management. She added another voice message, speaking in a low voice. "This company is registered in Switzerland, and the list of directors is full of shell companies. I checked their security contract. There are traces of former special forces." I stared at the last name Schneider. Jane mentioned on the phone yesterday that Jacob called out Bellkeeper 7 times during the interrogation, and there was a scribbled note on the edge of the case file. "Miguel is the true heir." Miguel is my brother's Spanish name, and Bellkeeper was also what Marta wrote in the letter. "I'm going to Zurich," I messaged Jane, "to investigate Schneider." She replied immediately, "Bring your gun. The rain in Zurich is colder than in Amsterdam." I was standing in the Alpine Wealth Forum banquet hall in a rented dark grey suit, with antique cufflinks I'd found at a thrift store pinned to my cuffs, similar to the LM style Lucien had used to threaten people. Otto Schneider was 5 meters away. He was holding a champagne glass. His back was as straight as an iron rod, and there was an old scar at the corner of his eye, running slantwise from his brow to his jaw. "Mr. Schneider," I said, holding up my glass and leaning forward, "I've long admired your unique insights into the value of time." He turned his face and his pupils shrank. The same reaction as Jacob when he saw the transfer record. "Mr. West," he smiled, stroking the wall of the cup with his fingertips. "Are you an investment advisor? You said in the Swiss Financial Times last month that the best asset allocation is to make every minute generate income." I took a sip of my wine. "That reminds me of some old cases." "Old case?" 3 years ago, there was a jeweler who always said, "Time is the best tool for selling stolen goods." I stared at his Adam's apple. He liked to use watches as metaphors, such as watchmaker. Otto's glass stopped in midair. The waiter behind him suddenly coughed. He turned his head to look at him, and when he turned back, his smile was still there, but his eyes were like ice. "Mr. West, some stories are better not to hear." I touched the rim of his cup, but I just don't like to listen to advice. As I left the banquet hall, the back of my neck started to feel hot again. This feeling is very familiar to me.
It was the same feeling I had when I was held at gunpoint from behind while chasing a smuggling truck in Malaga 3 years ago. The hotel room is on the 6th floor. I locked the door and just connected my computer to the charger when my phone rang. The text message did not show the number, but only one line of text. "Don't investigate further, you already know too much." The moment I grabbed the phone, the door lock clicked, automatically unlocked. My heart was pounding so hard my ribs ached. I picked up the pepper spray from under my pillow and walked to the closet. The lights went out with a snap. Someone had cut off the power from outside. The footsteps were light, like those of a cat. There were 2 people, one at the door and the other going towards the bed. I curled up in the innermost part of the closet and saw through the gap the flashlight shining through the compartment of the suitcase. There was the micro tracker given by Carl and the old photos sent by Marta. "Where's the computer?" asked a deep and hoarse male voice. It might be in him. Another voice came closer. The boss said he wanted to see him alive. Suddenly the bell tower outside the window rang. It struck 12 times, each one heavier than the last. When I counted to 7, my left hand touched the safety latch on the inside of the closet. I checked it when I came in. The metal edge felt like the same thing as when I held my brother's pocket watch the night he had a car accident 3 years ago. When the 8th bell rang, I pushed open the wardrobe. I sprayed the pepper spray at the nearest shadow. The man groaned and staggered back. I pushed another man aside and rushed to the window. The moment the glass shattered, sirens sounded downstairs. It was Jane who always said that intuition is more accurate than GPS. As I tumbled into the bushes, my phone vibrated in my pants pocket. Carl's name popped up on the screen. I hacked into the hotel surveillance, and the faces of those 2 people are exactly the same as the witnesses at the Malaga car accident 3 years ago. I wiped the blood off my face and looked up at the clock tower. The pointer stopped at 00, exactly the same as the photo in the email. "Check their communication records," I shouted into the phone. "And check the connection between Miguel and the clock keeper." The wind blew broken glass into my collar. In the distance I heard the sound of batons hitting the ground, and my fingers were on my pocket watch. When the crown was turned, the hand suddenly began to move, and the ticking sound was as clear as a heartbeat. This time, I won't be a prisoner anymore. I crouched in the bushes, my fingers still shaking, the pocket watch burning against my skin like a piece of red-hot iron. The phone vibrated again. Carl's number popped up on the screen. I buried my face in my arms and pressed the answer button. "Check your text messages." My voice was as hoarse as sandpaper. "Is there anything hidden in the threatening text message I just received?" "We're already doing it." Carl's voice was as muffled as if it was covered by water. "Is your phone not being monitored?" I just fell into the bushes. I pulled at my bleeding sleeve. Maybe water got in. "Wait 10 minutes.
After hanging up the phone, I took out my cell phone, which had been cooled by the rain.
The text message was still there. "Don't investigate further, you already know too much." The font was ordinary song font, and the sending number showed unknown. I stared at the screen, my back teeth aching from clenching them. At the car accident scene in Malaga 3 years ago, witnesses also received warnings from this kind of unknown number. In the 7th minute, the phone vibrated. Carl's voicemail. Reverse engineered the SMS code. The arrangement of letters has a non-random pattern, and the coordinates are spelled out by converting the ASCII code to decimal coordinates. I repeated to the air. 47 north latitude, 80 east longitude. Carl paused for 2 seconds. Abandoned monastery on the shore of Lake Zurich. I fished the crumpled map out of my pocket and rubbed the rain away with my knuckles. 47 der E. The point marked St. Clair's Abbey. Closed. "Why the monastery?" I asked. "I don't know." Carl's keyboard suddenly became more and more audible. But Roland Bremer just published a report. Roland Schneider Asset Management was exposed, Carl said. It is linked to 5 transnational money laundering cases. Now the financial market is exploding. I clenched the map tightly, blood seeping from between my fingers. Otto Schneider, the head of a Swiss private security company, the black Mercedes-Benz that appeared at the end of the surveillance footage of the car accident in Malaga 3 years ago, had a license plate from Schneider's company. I'll go to the convent. I stood up, my knees banging on the stone. Tell Anna Fletcher to wait for me to video chat. She's in London, Carl said. It's 3 in the morning. Wake her up. I broke off a branch from a bush and used it as a crutch. Just say. Half an hour later, I huddled in the convenience store bathroom and turned on the video. Anna's face appeared on the screen. Her blonde hair was tangled, and her left eye was still stained by sleep. Ellery, she said hoarsely. Carl said you have a code to crack. I took a screenshot of the message and sent it over. Carl figured out the coordinates based on the pattern of the letters. I pointed at the screen, but there's also a set of numbers in the message. Anna leaned closer to the computer, her glasses sliding down to the tip of her nose. 19, 17, 23, she muttered, quickly writing letters on the paper. A1, B2, 19 is S, 17 is Q, 23 is W. SQW? No, I shook my head. The monastery in Zurich is related to clocks. Anna looked up suddenly. Krapikorbiki from the watchmaker era. She grabbed a red pen. From the 16th to the 18th century, Swiss watchmakers used gear numbers as keys. 19, 17, 23, probably the number of teeth on the 3 gears. What's the meaning? Gear ratio. Anna drew 3 circles on the paper. The 19-tooth gear turns 1 circle. The 17-tooth gear turns 19-17 circles. And the 23-tooth gear turns 19 circles. This ratio can generate a unique code table. She suddenly paused. You said the coordinates of the monastery on Lake Zurich. St. Clair. That was the secret base of the Watchmakers Guild in the 16th century. Anna tapped her fingers on the table. They used the monastery cellar to hide the encrypted blueprints. Go there and find the stone with gear patterns engraved on it. I turned off the video and stuffed my phone into a waterproof bag. The rain was still falling, hitting the glass of the convenience store like someone typing in Morse code. The title of Roland's report jumped in the news push. Schneider Asset Management, the money laundering empire of a Swiss security company. The comments section has exploded. Someone posted a photo of Otto Schneider at the Geneva Forum. He was dressed in a suit and his eyes were like a poisoned knife. I took a black car. The driver was a middle-aged man, wearing a gold chain and a St. Christopher amulet hanging from the rearview mirror. To St. Clair's Abbey, I said. He looked at me in the rearview mirror and said, that place has been closed for a long time. A black car passed by half an hour ago, carrying barbed wire and guns. I took out the euros from my wallet and patted the back of his hand. Drive faster. The monastery is at the end of the lake bay, with a new lock on the iron gate, and cameras wrapped around the barbed wire. I went around to the back of the mountain, and climbed up on the slippery rocks. The bushes scratched the back of my hand, and blood dripped onto the moss like red berries. The entrance to the cellar was under the bell tower, and there was fresh soil between the stone slabs. Someone had just dug it up. I took out my Swiss Army knife and pried open the stone slab. The smell of mold and rust came out. The flashlight swept across the wall. A Latin plaque was embedded in the stone bricks. The gears of time will not turn back, but the clock keeper knows the secret of stopping. 3 gears were engraved below, with the numbers of teeth being 19, 17, and 23 respectively, exactly the same as the numbers in the text message. I took out my phone, took a picture, and sent it to Anna. 3 seconds later, her voice popped up. Key instructions. The core of the Clockkeeper project is the time box, which contains all transaction records. Bang. There was a sound of metal clanging coming from deep in the cellar. I turned off the flashlight and huddled into the crevice. The footsteps were getting closer and closer, and the sound of leather heels tapping on the blue stone slabs felt like tapping on my heart. Boss,
There are cameras here.
Tear it down. It was Otto Schneider's voice, hoarse as sandpaper scraping iron. Look for the box. The bank is already checking us out because of Bremer's shitty report half an hour ago. If West gets there first, he can't get in. Otto sneered. But what if? My breath caught in my throat. The light outside the crack in the stone flickered, and someone's shadow was cast on the wall. I felt the collapsed area behind me. Half of the tombstone slab was cracked, just enough for one person to fit through. This way, I curled up in the tomb, and the moldy dirt fell on my collar. Through the crack, Otto was seen standing in front of the nameplate, his white-gloved fingers running over the gear pattern. "Take a picture of this," he said to his men, "and send it to Van Doren, so he can confirm if this is the location." "Boss, could the box be in?" "Shut up." Otto's voice suddenly turned cold. "Find the box and destroy it immediately. It can't be allowed to fall into the hands of the police again." The footsteps gradually faded away. I counted my own heartbeats, 1, 2, until I could no longer hear them. The pocket watch vibrated gently in my trouser pocket, and the pointer began to move. The ticking sound was like someone saying in my ear, "It's time to wake up." I took out my phone. The screen lit up, and a message from Anna popped up. "The time box they are looking for may be hidden in." There was a sound of the iron door being knocked open at the cellar entrance. I held my breath, and the dust from the tomb fell into my eyes, making them stinging and painful. Otto's men were shouting, "There are footprints this way." I shrank into a darker corner and listened to their footsteps coming closer, and then farther away. The hands of the pocket watch stopped at 2:17, exactly the same as the clock on the wall in the hospital when my brother had the car accident 3 years ago. This time, I won't let them lock the truth into time. When I counted to the 80th heartbeat, the footsteps outside the stone slab finally disappeared completely. The moldy dust fell from the top of my head to the back of my neck. I wiped my face and my fingers were covered with dust. The phone screen was still on, and Anna's message stopped after "maybe hidden in." The prompt box that was suddenly cut off was glowing with a cold white light. The pocket watch was resting against his thigh in his trouser pocket, and the hands had reached 2:17 without him noticing, the same time as the hospital clock 3 years ago. I slid out of the tomb, along the wall, my boots crushing a few grains of gravel. The mold spots on the cellar vault glowed bluish-gray in the darkness, and there were still footprints along the route Schneider and his companions had just walked, like a string of arrows of varying depths. I followed the arrow and passed the nameplate engraved with a gear pattern. I swept the flashlight across the ground. The gap in a blue stone slab was half a finger wider than other places. I pressed down and heard a slight click. The stone wall behind the altar suddenly cracked. I held my breath and shone the flashlight inside. The iron door was rusty, with a line of small words engraved on the lintel. "Only those who know the time can pass." As soon as my finger touched the door handle, my phone vibrated in my palm. It was a new message from Anna, 1917-23. "Try this combination." I stared at the number for 3 seconds. 3 days ago, when she cracked Lucien's old computer, she said that this string of numbers corresponded to the German alphabetical code for clock keeper. The moment the input key was pressed, the door lock popped open with a buzz. Inside the door is a smaller stone chamber. The bronze box was placed on the central stone platform. The relief carvings of the 12 zodiac signs on its surface were polished to a shine, and the gears were turning slowly in the secret compartment. I took out a handkerchief, wrapped my hands, and gently opened the lid of the box. The musty smell mixed with the aroma of stale paper pages poured out. Yellowed account books, a family emblem carved with irises, and a document with the bellkeeper agreement printed on the cover were neatly stacked on the velvet lining. The phone lit up at this moment, and Anna's video request popped up. I pointed the camera at the account book, and her voice was filled with electrical noise. "Turn to page." The paper was as brittle as thin ice,
and I held my breath as I opened it. The pen words glowed dark brown under the flashlight. 2019-317. Zurich Bank, 12 million euros payment to VC. VC is the abbreviation of the current Dutch Minister of Culture. I remember Jane mentioned that he has recently been pushing for the relaxation of restrictions on the import and export of antiques. It's not just smuggling. Anna tapped the screen with her fingertips. These funding chains are connected to the bidding of municipal projects and the approval of port expansion. They are using jewelry as a shell to support a shadow government. I took 20 photos of the account book, and my hands were shaking when I uploaded them to the cloud. I stuffed the family emblem into my inner pocket, and the metal edge dug into my ribs. Just as the agreement document was unfolded half a page, there was a loud noise from the iron door being slammed open at the cellar entrance. "Boss, the door behind the altar is open." It was the voice of Schneider's men. I turned around, clutching the box, and heard the sound of leather heels hitting the stone slabs coming towards me. The stone chamber had only one door. I picked up the candlestick on the table and smashed it against the left wall. The moldy ashes fell down, revealing a ventilation duct half a person's height. Inside, the moment the flashlight beam came in, I crawled into the pipe. Rust scraped across the back of my hand, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. It was so stuffy in the pipe that I couldn't breathe. I could only crawl along the wind direction, until I heard Schneider's curse from below. "Block the exit. Exit." I touched the iron mesh at the end of the pipe and kicked it twice, but it didn't move. There were footsteps behind me, getting closer and closer. I untied my belt, wrapped it around the iron net, and pulled it hard. With a click, half of the iron net tilted. I scraped my shoulder as I squeezed out and tumbled into the bushes, hearing Schneider yell, "Chase! Don't let him get away." The moonlight outside the monastery was bright. I ran close to the wall, crushing a few fallen leaves with my heels. The phone vibrated in my trouser pocket, and a message from Marta popped up. "Did you find it? Now, it's time to tell the world the truth." I stopped by the lake. The water of Lake Zurich was above my feet and freezing cold. The pocket watch was still in his pocket. The hand stopped at 2:17, exactly the same as the day my brother had the car accident. This time, I won't let them lock the truth into time. I fished out my cell phone and found Roland Bremer's number. He answered the phone quickly, with the sound of keyboard tapping in the background. "West. Late in the night. I have the scoop." I interrupted. "All the evidence about the Clockkeeper project." The keyboard sounds on the other end of the phone stopped. "Where are you?" "On the shore of Lake Zurich." I looked at the abandoned fishing house in the distance. The window lattice cast a spider-web-like shadow in the moonlight. "See you at the fishing house in half an hour." After hanging up the phone, the lake's surface suddenly shook. The moonlight was shattered into silver flakes, as if someone had stirred something underwater. I clenched the family emblem in my inner pocket, and the metal edge hurt my hand. This time, they would not be able to sleep. The hinges of the wooden door of the fishing hut were rusty, and the door creaked when I pushed it. The moonlight poured in through the broken window, illuminating the half-rotten fishing nets piled in the corner. The musty smell mixed with the fishy smell of the lake water went straight into the nose. I took out my phone and checked the time. There were still 7 minutes left before the half-hour agreed upon with Roland. The pocket watch in my trouser pocket suddenly pricked me. On the day my brother had the accident, his pocket watch also stopped at 2:17, exactly the same watch I found in the monastery cellar. I clutched the pocket watch tightly, the metal surface still retaining my body temperature. There were footsteps outside the door. I stood against the wall behind the door, until I could see clearly that the person coming was Roland. His grey suit was wrinkled. He was holding a black computer bag, and his tie was crooked at his collarbone. He saw me, raised his chin, and asked, "Did you bring the things?" I slapped the USB drive on the table and said, "The copy of the agreement and the photos of the account book are all in it." He pulled out a chair and sat down.
The blue light from the computer turning on made his eye sockets turn blue. When he turned to the second page, his fingers stopped. West, do you know who is on this list? He raised his head and his Adam's apple moved. 3 current members of Congress, the deputy governor of the central bank. That's why I came to you. I leaned over the edge of the table and said, they can cover up the death of a jeweler, but they can't cover up the secrets of the entire Bellkeeper organization. Roland's fingers were rapidly tapping on the keyboard, and suddenly stopped.
Wait, there's something stuck in the account book. He pulled out a piece of film smaller than a fingernail, held it up to the flashlight of his phone and said, "It looks like a microfilm."
I pulled out the magnifying glass I had found under the altar in the monastery. The lines on the film developed under the light, revealing a string of garbled characters. "Anna," I called. "I need you." The moment the call was connected, Roland's computer screen lit up. Anna's face appeared in the video frame, the lenses reflecting cold light, and she said, "Send it to me." Roland sent over the scanned copy of the film. 3 seconds later, Anna's pen moved quickly on the paper, and she said, "This is the Virginia cipher. The key may be related to the date." She suddenly stopped and said, "Geneva. 3 days later, 10 o'clock in the evening." "What?" I leaned closer to the screen. "Watchmaker's Assembly" appears repeatedly in the communication records. Anna pushed up her glasses and said, "According to the coordinates, the location is an abandoned observatory outside Geneva." There was a crisp sound of branches breaking outside the window. I looked up suddenly and saw a dark shadow flashing in the moonlight. Something's going on. I grabbed the USB drive and stuffed it into Roland's hand, saying, "Take the things and go out the back door." "What about you?"
They're looking for me. I took out the smoke bomb from my pocket. I found it in the monastery cellar left by Schneider's men.
As Roland rushed to the back door, the front door was kicked open. The light from the flashlight was so bright that people couldn't open their eyes. Schneider's voice came in with the sound of the wind. "West, you can't run away." I threw the smoke bomb to the ground. The moment the white-gray smoke rose, I touched the windowsill and climbed out. My back hit the wooden wall outside the fishing hut, and I heard Schneider yell, "Search by spreading out." The phone vibrated in my trouser pocket. It was the location information sent by Anna. I hacked into their surveillance system, and they thought you were running towards Germany. I pulled out the micro recorder from my collar and pressed the play button. It was the panting sound of running towards the northwards that I had recorded in advance, and then I threw it onto the roof. The roar of a speedboat came from the lake. I crouched down and ran to the lakeside, and saw 3 motorboats rushing towards the fishing house with searchlights on the bows. "This way," a mercenary shouted. I dove into the water, and it was so cold my lungs felt like they were going to explode. When the lake water reached above my head, I heard Schneider's roar drowned out by the sound of the waves. By the time I climbed to the other side, my clothes were all stuck to my body. In the distance there was the sound of sirens, not Schneider's, but Swiss police sirens. I pulled out my phone, and the screen lit up with a new message from Marta. "They know you found out something, but they don't know how much you know." The train approaching station was signaled by a chime. I huddled in the last row of the second-class seats, watching Lake Zurich gradually being left behind outside the window. The pocket watch was still in his trouser pocket, and this time the hands did not stop, but moved forward 1 tick at a time, towards Anna's message popped up. "The encrypted channel has been established. Contact us when needed." I looked at my reflection in the glass. Watermarks flowed down the car window, dividing the blood-stained and scratched face into 2 halves. One half was the amnesiac, who woke up on the streets of Amsterdam 3 months ago, and the other half was the hunter who now held the lifeline of the Bellkeeper organization. The train entered the tunnel. In the darkness I pressed the encrypted link sent by Anna. The moment the screen lit up, I heard the sound of my own heartbeat, louder than any alarm. As the train emerged from the tunnel, I stared at the encryption interface on my phone. Anna's message popped up. Claire's private mailbox has been located. An email disguised as watchmaker needs to be sent within 2 hours. I wiped the watermarks on my face. The cold water from Lake Zurich was still flowing down the back of my neck, but my fingertips were so hot that I could hardly hold the phone. When I woke up on the streets of Amsterdam 3 months ago, I didn't even know my name. Now I know that Ellery West is a torn label, and I'm going to pick it up and put it back on the person whose face it belongs to. Before pressing the send button, I checked the content of the email again. I have the admission ticket to the Geneva conference. To trade, transfer 3 million euros to account 174 in the Cayman Islands. The signature was watchmaker, the name for the core contact person within the Lucien smuggling group. This was the clue Marta gave me in Spain. The phone vibrates. It's Anna. Claire opened the email. 2 hours later, Jane called. She lowered her voice and said, Van Doren has made an appointment for a psychiatric session tomorrow afternoon at 3:00 p.m. using your wife Claire's name. She's taken the bait. I squeezed my phone. Have Marcel ready to track the cryptocurrency link. He has been checking Claire's transfer records for the past 3 months. Jane paused. Ellery, don't do it alone this time. I won't be a pawn anymore. I hung up the phone and took out the miniature recorder from my pocket. This was the one Jane gave me this morning. It can be transmitted synchronously to the Bureau's server. At 3 o'clock the next afternoon, the doorbell of Van Doren's clinic rang on time. He was wearing a light gray suit and his tie was tied meticulously. When he saw me, he gave me that gentle smile that only psychiatrists have. Claire said, that you've had more frequent flashbacks recently. I always dream about the red roofs of Malaga. I sat in the soft chair and stared at the pocket watch on his desk. Exactly the same as the one in the photo of Lucien's death scene. Relax. He tapped the table with his fingertips. Follow my voice, and slowly close your eyes. I counted his breathing. 3 months ago at the police station, he used the same rhythm to induce me to recall the non-existent murder scene. Now I know that it was a loophole of PTSD that he exploited to implant false memories. You are in a fishing hut in Switzerland now. His voice was like honey. Lucien rushed in with a knife. And you... I picked up the cufflink he dropped on the floor, I added. The one with LM engraved on it. Van Doren paused. And then I ran. I closed my eyes. The cufflinks are hidden in the safe deposit box. Number 13, Section B, at the Vancouver Bank. He didn't say anything. I could hear the recorder tapping softly behind my ear, and Jane's breathing coming through the Bluetooth headset. She was monitoring from the van across the street. Very good. Van Doren put his hand on my shoulder. Think about it again. Is there anything else? That's enough. I opened my eyes and stared at his pupils that suddenly tightened. You are not here to help me restore my memory. I pressed the play button on my phone. His voice came from the recording. Lucien rushed in with a knife in hand. You're here to shut me up. I stood up and approached him, just like you did when you helped Claire tamper with my memory. Van Doren took 2 steps back, knocking over the coffee cup on the table. Brown liquid seeped into his suit pants, but he grabbed his briefcase as if unconscious. I need to confirm with Claire. No need. I pointed out the window. Jane's police car was parked across the street, and Marcel leaned his head out of the passenger seat and made a locked gesture to me. As Van Doren bolted out the door, my phone lit up. An anonymous text message from a sender identified LM. You think you are uncovering the truth, but you are just another cog in the wheel. I rushed into the elevator, holding my phone. Downstairs, Jane rolled down the window. Marcel cracked Claire's virtual currency link. Some of the funds flowed to an offshore trust in Switzerland, which matches the hidden account in the Bellkeeper agreement. Bellkeeper? I frowned. Anna just deciphered a new clue. Jane started the engine. That's the buyer's code behind Lucien. But she glanced at my phone. The IP address of this text message overlaps with the server address of the clockkeeper. The evening breeze brought in rain from Amsterdam. I looked out the window at the darkening sky, the text message still flashing on the screen. This time I finally realized that what I wanted to destroy was far more than just the label of a scapegoat. The phone vibrated in my palm. It was a message from Anna. In the encrypted file of the clock keeper, there is a record about the second cufflink. The rain is getting heavier. I stared at the winding watermarks on the glass and suddenly remembered what Marta said in Spain. The real lies are never hidden, but what you think you have seen clearly. And I finally touched that line. The phone vibrated so hard in my palm that it felt numb. I was staring at the streaks of water the wipers made on the windshield when Anna's message popped up. Lucien's family crest, micro-engraved on the reverse. Jane parked the car in the alley next to the old church. I took out the badge from the inside pocket of my suit. I had found it next to Lucien's body and thought it was evidence left by the murderer. Now turning it over under the street light, I saw a line of tiny numbers embedded in the carvings on the metal surface. The key number for the safe deposit box at the Vancouver bank. Jane pointed her finger at the number. But I need authorization from the Canadian Financial Supervisory Authority to retrieve the records. I called Roland, the reporter, who always liked to smoke a cigar, answered quickly, with the hum of the printer in the background. Ellery.
I just found out that there was an unusual transfer in Lucien's account in Vancouver 3 months ago.
Help me retrieve the account opening information for safe deposit box number 13 in Area B. I interrupted him. Use your informant in the Canadian Ministry of Finance and say it involves a transnational smuggling case. There was silence on the other end of the line for 2 seconds, followed by the click of a lighter. I'll call you back in half an hour. After hanging up the phone, Jane's phone lit up. Marta sent me a photo of a yellowed letter from Spain. I leaned over to take a look. The handwriting was so familiar that it made my temples swell. It was my handwriting, written 2 years ago. If anything unexpected happens, contact Lucas Herman at the Federal Bank of Zurich. He has a map of the smuggling group's capital chain. Switzerland. Jane looked up. Now? I squeezed the badge. The rain was still falling, but the cold sweat on the back of my neck was cooler than the rain. Lucas was a chess piece I planted before I lost my memory. Now it's time for him to play his role. The sky in Zurich was as dark as lead. I stood in front of the Federal Bank building, with a copy of an old letter that Marta had sent me overnight in my suit pocket. After checking the documents proving she was the heir to the West family, the receptionist called Lucas's extension. Please follow me. The assistant in a silver gray suit led me to the elevator. Mr. Herman is waiting for you in the VIP room on the top floor. Lucas's office has a full wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. When he stood up, his gold-rimmed glasses slid down his nose, revealing a gentle smile that overlapped with the one in his memory. Mr. West, I've heard a lot about you. I put the badge on his desk. The sound of metal collision made his pupils shrink slightly. That was something that Lucien never left behind, and it was now lying on his mahogany table. I need to see the key code for the Vancouver branch. I got straight to the point. As the heir to the family assets, according to Article 17 of the Swiss Banking Act. That's enough. He suddenly interrupted me, tapping the edge of the badge with his fingers. 2 years ago, a man also came to me with this thing, saying that he wanted to investigate the flow of funds for jewelry smuggling. Then he had a car accident and was never seen again. My throat tightened. Fragments of memory flashed before my eyes. The sudden breaking on a rainy night, the sound of glass breaking, and Marta's face crying, Ellery, he's standing in front of you now. I pressed the back of his hand. I need those codes, Lucas. It's not about succession, it's about closure. He stared into my eyes for 30 seconds. Then he stood up, opened the drawer, and took out a black USB drive. Come with me to the safe. I heard my own heartbeat as the metal door of the vault closed behind me. Lucas called up the key interface of the Vancouver branch, and a blue light reflected on his glasses. This is the access code for all the safes in Area B. It will take 3 minutes to copy it. I took out the signal repeater hidden in my sleeve and tapped quickly on the keyboard with my fingertips. When the small red light on the transponder came on, Lucas's watch suddenly vibrated. He looked down, his face suddenly changed. The Swiss Federal Police are on their way. They have obtained a freezing order for the Bellkeeper agreement. How long? 5 minutes. I shoved the USB drive back into his hands, turned and rushed towards the safe door. The numbers on the combination lock jumped before my eyes. The moment the door opened, hurried footsteps were heard in the corridor. Isabel Colt. The woman who had chased out held up her ID, her police badge glowing coldly under the light. Swiss Federal Police, you are wanted for allegedly assisting in money laundering. I ran towards the stairwell. From behind came her orders. Seal all exits. Contact the border agency. The roar of the night train drowned out the vibration of the cell phone. I huddled in the last row of seats with the curtains drawn tightly, and as messages came one after another, the repeater signal is stable. The code is being passed. We got the last piece of the puzzle. The lights of Zurich passed by the window and were gradually swallowed up by darkness. I took out the transponder from my shirt pocket. The metal casing still had body temperature. Marta's voice suddenly popped up in my memory. You said that we should put this dirty money in the sun. As the train entered the tunnel, the phone screen lit up with new messages. It was a location from Jane. Amsterdam Central Station. I'm waiting for you on the platform. I looked at my reflection in the window, the rain scratching cracks in the glass. Those tampered memories and covered up truths will finally surface along with the code in this transponder. The transponder felt hot in my palm. I knew that once the train reached Amsterdam and Anna cracked the codes, all the lies, including the true identity of the Bellkeeper, would be exposed. When the train came to a stop, the soles of my shoes were still wet with Zurich rain. Jane stood at the end of the platform, with coffee stains on the collar of her police uniform. She must have stayed up all night. Anna is waiting for you. She handed me a cup of hot cocoa. The paper cup burned my knuckles. As soon as the studio door was pushed open, Anna rushed over and grabbed the transponder. The code has been passed 73%, and there is a transfer record of 370 million. She tapped the screen, and green numbers jumped in the dark room. It will arrive in Panama and the account name is Watchmaker. I squeezed the paper cup tightly, and the hot cocoa splashed onto my sleeves. Draw the snake out of its hole. Jane's fingers tapped out a rhythm on the table. Forged a transfer confirmation email, sent using Lucien's old server. Claire has been in charge of the smuggling accounts for 3 years, and she is more sensitive to the word watchmaker than anyone else. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was staring at the send button on my email. The recipient was claire.divinedagar.com, the work email address Claire had used for 7 years. The email title only has 4 words: accept all. At 4:17, Marcel's video call popped up. In the surveillance footage, Claire crushed the mug, and the coffee splashed on Lucien's portrait. She grabbed the phone, her knuckles whitening. Dr. Fan, we must do a deep intervention now. He's contacting Otto Schneider. Marcel pushed up his glasses, and the screen switched to another set of call records. Van Doren's voice was mixed with electricity. Ellery knows too much. He must shut up forever. Jane pressed the record button. This is the 3rd chain of evidence. At daybreak I stood in front of the Van Doren clinic. The tiny disruptor on the cuff was pressed against my skin. Lucas stuffed it into my hand. They use high-frequency brainwaves to interfere with memory. This thing can turn their machines into noise generators. The doorbell rang 3 times. Van Doren's gold-rimmed glasses gleamed. Ellery, a rare visitor. I keep thinking about the red roofs of Malaga. I stumbled to a sitting position. You said hypnosis could help me. He bent over to adjust the aromatherapy machine, and I fumbled for the jammer. As the mint scent spread, his voice was like being soaked in warm water. Relax, Ellery. You're at the beach now. Can you hear the waves? The waves are big. I stared at the rise and fall of his Adam's apple and pressed the switch with my thumb. In the car accident 3 months ago, you hit Lucien's car. His voice suddenly became sharp. You stole the cufflinks and you killed him. I clutched the sofa cushions as the high-frequency noise hurt my eardrums. The phone vibrated in my pocket. The recording was being uploaded to the cloud. That's enough. I stood up suddenly, and the jammer fell from my sleeve. You should check the equipment. It seems to be broken. Van Doren's face was as white as the wall. I heard him slam his coffee cup as I closed the door. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Isabel's phone was woken up by a message. Geneva auction. Franz Weissman is there. In the attached photo, the man in a custom suit holding a red wine glass was the anonymous financier who funded her investigation into the clockkeeper. Vice President of the Swiss National Bank? Jane gasped. No wonder the funding chain cannot be broken. Marta's phone call came at 8:17, with the sound of the wind from Malaga in the background. They're going to do something to you tonight. Her voice was trembling. I heard them say clean up. I took out the encrypted USB drive from the drawer and dragged the clinic recordings, transfer records, and photos of Franz into the synchronization software. Jane's dialog box popped up. Need support. Roland's message was a location. I'm downstairs. Anna only sent a bomb emoticon. Finally, I sent the trio a message. See you tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. at Grand Central Station. When the phone screen went off, the clock in the living room showed 11:30. I took out the pepper spray hidden in the flower pot and looked downstairs through the gap in the curtains. 2 men in black jackets were smoking, and one of them had a watch flashing the same blue light as Van Doren. It's raining again. I adjusted my collar in front of the mirror and rubbed the old scar on my Adam's apple with my fingertips. It was the cut I received from a smuggler when I was an informant 3 years ago. Tomorrow, at 7, I looked down at the clock and stuffed the spray into my sleeve. The early morning wind blew in through the window, making the sticky notes on the table rustle. Above is the postcard Marta sent last week. On the back it says, "You said you wanted to put the dirty money in the sun." I clenched my fists, my knuckles pressing against the cool window glass. What will be waiting for me at Grand Central Station at 6:50? I was squatting behind the third row of seats on platform B2 at Grand Central Station. The pocket watch cover made a slight sound when it was closed, and the USB flash drive slid into the gap between the chairs along the watch case. His fingertips rubbed against the gum stains on the wood, sticky like the wet blood next to Lucien's body. The wind blew into my hooded windbreaker, making the back of my neck feel cold. My sunglasses slid to the tip of my nose, and I raised my wrist to press them down. Jane's news had just shocked me. She said that the plainclothes team was behind locker number 3. Marcel stared at the surveillance screen and could clearly see everyone wearing black gloves. When Claire appeared, the platform clock showed 6:53. She wore a burgundy coat with a fur collar that swept over the shoulders of her 2 black-clad bodyguards. One of them touched his lower back, and the metallic glare made me squint. It was the handle of a Glock 7. I shrank back behind the vending machine. She stopped in front of seat number 4 and tapped the ground with the tips of her high heels. That's the data location mentioned in my text message. At 6:54, Van Doren came down escalator number. He wore a navy blue tie and kept touching his left earlobe with his fingers, the same action he had done when he was pricked by the jammer in the clinic. He stood in front of the newsstand, pretending to read the Telegraph, but his eyes were fixed on the back of Claire's neck. I touched the tiny bug on my cuff. The metal piece rubbed against my skin, like the edge of a postcard sent by Marta. Target A. Claire is in place. Target B. Van Doren is at the newsstand. I whispered into the Bluetooth headset. Marcel's voice squeezed out from the headset. The exit surveillance shows that 3 people wearing assault jackets and tactical boots are at the north, south, and west exits. They are Schneider's men. Jane's breathing became heavier. Keep your distance and wait for the trading signal. Claire bent over to lift the seat cover. I held the bug on my sleeve tightly and squeezed into the crowd on her left. "Excuse me," I bumped her shoulder. She staggered a step, and the scent of Chanel No. 5 rushed into her nose. I pressed my fingertips under her collar for half a second. The bug latched onto the metal buckle. "Have your eyes grown feet?" She glared at me. I bowed my head and apologized, my sunglasses sliding down to the tip of my nose. She didn't recognize me. I wasn't wearing a hat at the police station 3 days ago. "Target A is carrying a bug and the signal is normal," said Marcel. I joined the queue for croissants. Claire straightened up and shook her head at the bodyguard. She didn't find the USB drive. Van Doren put down his newspaper and walked toward her. "Transaction begins." I pressed the switch of the Bluetooth headset. Jane's voice was like a taut string. "Action." When the plainclothes team rushed out from behind the lockers, Claire's bodyguards had already drawn their guns. "Police, don't move." Van Doren turned and ran towards the escalator, but was pinned to the ground by 2 plainclothes officers. Claire screamed and tried to grab the bodyguard's gun, but her arm was twisted back. "Fuck you," she kicked over the croissant stand, and the baguette rolled to my feet. The smoke bomb exploded with a bang. The platform suddenly went white, with sounds of coughing, sirens, and breaking glass mixed together. Schneider's men set off the smoke bomb. Marcel shouted. 3 mercenaries rushed in from the north exit. I covered my mouth and nose and ran south. Someone pulled my collar from behind with such force that it almost dislocated my neck. "I'm looking for you." A hoarse voice was close to my ear. I elbowed him in the stomach, and when I turned around I saw the scar on his face, the same location as the one on the killer who chased me in Malaga 3 years ago. He reached for his waist, and I picked up the wheelchair next to me and pushed it over. He staggered 2 steps. A gun went off, and the bullet grazed the tip of my ear and hit the pillar. Ellery. The roar of motorcycles drowned out the sound of gunfire. Roland's modified Harley broke through the glass door. There was a bulletproof plate tied to the rear rack, and the headlights made it impossible for me to open my eyes. Scarkiller raised his gun and aimed at Roland. I rushed over and hit him on the wrist. A bullet went through the ceiling, and lime fell on his head. "Come up," Roland shouted. I grabbed the rear rack and stepped onto the bike with 1 foot. The burning smell of the tires rubbing against the ground was so piercing that it was impossible to open one's eyes. The motorcycle brushed past the mercenary's nose and rushed out. "Hard drive," I yelled. Roland tossed me a black USB flash drive box. I took it from Claire's bag when she was pinned down just now. The box still carried her body temperature. The sirens were getting closer. In the rearview mirror, Jane ran out of the platform with a gun in hand and waved at us. "Go to the dock," Roland said. "Anna is waiting there." The wind blew into my windbreaker, and the hard drive case pressed against my thigh. I looked down at it, and my distorted face was reflected on the metal surface. Exactly the same expression I had when I held up the informant's testimony on the beach in Malaga 3 years ago. The lights of the dock flickered 2 kilometers away. Anna's message shook the phone. "The cracking program has been loaded." Amid the sound of tires crunching over gravel, I heard the sound of the tide flooding over the dock. It's exactly like the waves that Van Doren talked about during hypnosis. But this time, the sound of waves was mixed with the sound of metal friction. The hard drive was spinning. As Roland's Harley rolled over the rusty rails of the dockyard, I banged my knee against the bullet-blowed plate and gasped in pain. He put 1 foot on the ground and gave me a look. Anna is in the tin house at the back. The iron door opened with a creak. Anna's ponytail was stained with motor oil, and the blue light from the computer screen made her eye sockets look blue. "Come here." She tapped on the keyboard. "This broken hard drive uses triple quantum encryption." I hacked into the server of ETH Zurich and barely cracked the first layer. I slammed the USB box on the table. The sound of metal colliding made her shrink her shoulders in fear. "Claire's," I said. She grabbed the box, and the moment her fingernails scratched the seal, the tail end of a siren came from outside the window. Jane was here. Ellery. Jane's voice came in with the sea breeze. There was blood on the cuffs of her uniform, probably from being cut by broken glass on the platform just now. Claire confessed. She slammed her phone on the table. The mid-level members of the smuggling network are all on the list, but she refuses to reveal who Dillo 1 is. There are 27 cases of memory tampering in Van Doren's clinic computer, including you. Tampering. My throat tightened. He used hypnotic suggestion to override part of your memory. Jane's fingers tapped the computer, but now, a line of garbled code suddenly popped up on the screen. Anna's fingers pounded across the keyboard, and the garbled text cracked to reveal the gold-stamped title, Watchmaker Clockkeeper Merger Agreement. Shit. Roland leaned over to take a look. Franz Weissmann, Vice President of the Swiss National Bank, CEO of the United Bank of Canada, and this bellkeeper 001. He looked up. Lucien's name is in the attachment, marked as regional agent. Jane's phone vibrated. She picked up the phone, listened to a few words, and her face darkened. Marcel traced the signing location of the agreement to the Lal Manor in the Swiss Alps. Lucien went there 3 times a year when he was alive, saying it was a family summer retreat. Anna suddenly tugged at my sleeve. She pulled up a satellite image, and the red-roofed pointed cottage in the snow looked like a bloodstain. Ellery, you mentioned before that the Malaga cottage in the flashback. She zoomed in on the picture. The roof slope and chimney position are exactly the same. My temple was throbbing. The red roofs of Malaga, the safes of Vancouver, the sound of the waves of Van Doren. All the fragments suddenly began to spin and formed a vague outline in front of my eyes. Jane's cell phone rang again. She picked up the phone, listened for 2 seconds, and handed it to me. Isabel Coulter, from the Swiss police. Mr. West. The voice on the phone was like an icicle. Weissman slipped away from the Geneva conference 3 hours ago. My boss said to carefully investigate, but I know, she paused. There is a party at Laurel Manor tonight, and the core members of the Clock Keepers will be there. What do you want? Raid. Her breath pierced my ears like electricity. I need someone who understands the structure of the manor. And you, she chuckled, are the only one who can let their guard down. I clutched my phone tightly. Jane stared at me from the side, her eyes as sharp as a scalpel. Why me? Because you are no longer their pawn. Isabel's voice suddenly dropped. Or rather, you never were. When I hung up the phone, the light in the tin house went out with a click. Anna cursed and fished out the emergency light. In the dim light, Jane's face was half bright and half dark. She's right. The red-roofed cottage in your flashback was the undercover contact point of the Spanish police 3 years ago. Marta emailed me yesterday. Your mission at the time was to get close to the apex of the smuggling network. Vertex. This word is like a key, clicking open the cracks in memory. I fished out the Lucien family crest from my pocket, and the metal edge touched my palm. The sound of waves suddenly exploded in my ears. It was not Van Doren's hypnosis, but the real salty sea. Remember, your mission is to get closer to the top, not to destroy it. A male voice emerged from the depths of memory. I raised my head sharply in the mirror. A man in a black suit was staring at me. He had a shallow scar at the corner of his eye, exactly the same as I have now. It's me, I muttered to myself. Jane didn't say anything, just patted my shoulder. Roland threw the Harley motorcycle key over to him. Go get something, I'll take you to the airport in half an hour. Airport? Isabel has arranged a private plane, Jane said. Let's go to Spain first. Marta has your undercover file from 3 years ago. I clutched the badge tightly and turned toward the dock. The tide flooded over my feet, and the coolness spread up my trouser legs. In the distance, Roland's Harley motorcycle roared again, and Jane waved at me at the door of the tin house. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Isabel. Flight number 773. Gate B5. Don't be late. I looked at the sky. A crack appeared in the clouds, revealing a half moon. It looks very much like the spire in the satellite image of Laurel Manor, and also very much like the moon outside the window of the cottage in Malaga. The wind suddenly picked up. I tucked the badge into my collar and turned back toward the Harley. As the engine roar cut through the night, I touched the inside pocket of my windbreaker. There was Anna's copy of the agreement document and an email from Marta marked West Ellery undercover file. The plane should be waiting, and I am finally going to meet myself from 3 years ago. The Harley rolled over the slippery asphalt road, and Roland's back was stretched out in a line in front of me. Jane's wave was left in the rearview mirror, like a gradually blurred thumbtack. I touched the inside pocket of my windbreaker, and the agreement document Anna had copied was rubbing against my ribs. Hidden inside might be the answer to all the confusion I've had over the past 3 months. Fasten your helmets, Roland shouted. The wind rushed into my collar. I shivered and fastened my helmet tightly. The airport's lampposts flashed past my eyes like a string of broken pearls. The private plane was parked on the farthest runway, its door open and the gangway glowing coldly. Isabel said this was an absolutely safe passage, but when I stepped onto the gangway, sweat broke out on the back of my neck. The feeling of being hunted in Vancouver 3 months ago suddenly came to my mind again. The hatch slammed shut. The flight attendant handed me a hot towel, and I waved my hand. The document bag was pressed against my knees, and the seal had been torn off. Anna said that this was the merger agreement of the smuggling group that she cracked in 3 days, and it contained the true identity of Top. The pages rustled as they turned. The first 20 pages were filled with vague terms, and it wasn't until the last page when the signature line made my fingertips tremble. There were 23 signatures. Each one was crooked like a child's doodle, except for the line Bellkeeper 001, which was written with strong strokes and a tiny I at the end, outlined in red ink. I suddenly touched my chest. Lucien's family crest still hung on the necklace, the metal edge touching his skin. But a clearer memory suddenly came to his mind. In the safe of a Vancouver bank, there was a velvet box, and inside it was also a badge, not Lucien's family crest, but an eye that was polished to a shine. "Sir, do you need a blanket?" The flight attendant's voice was like a needle, puncturing the bubble of memory. I shook my head, digging my nails into my palms. It turns out that Bellkeeper 001 was not a businessman or politician, but a person who engraved the mark into the law enforcement system. Only those who deal with documents and badges all year round would have such an almost paranoid insistence on such a symbol. When the plane landed, the sunlight in Malaga was so bright that it was blinding. The guy from the car rental company threw the keys to me, but I ignored them and ran straight to the red-roofed cottage. The bougainvillea flowers on both sides of the road were in full bloom, but I couldn't remember the scent. Vendarin said my memory had been tampered with, and now it seems that he may have only said half of it. The wooden door of the hut was ajar. Marta's figure swayed behind the door, her white apron stained with flour. "Ellery," she called me, her voice like sun-dried linen, with a familiar warmth. My throat tightened, and I wanted to say something, but she handed me an iron box. "Before you passed out, you asked me to hide it in the fireplace secret compartment. You said, if I don't wake up, wait for someone to come and look for me." The lock of the iron box was rusty, so I used my fingernails to pry it open. At the top was a forged passport. The person in the photo was wearing gold-rimmed glasses and looked 70% like me now. There was a photo underneath, with the corners curled up and the yellow color of old newspaper. In the photo, I was wearing a wrinkled shirt, standing on the balcony of a cabin, with a man in a suit standing next to me. He had gray hair on his temples and a shallow scar at the corner of his eye. He was holding a coffee cup and smiling at me. My breathing suddenly became rapid. This man's voice has appeared in countless flashbacks of mine. "Remember, your mission is to approach the apex, not to destroy it. At that time, I thought it was Van Doren's hypnotic suggestion, but now I realize that it was a real conversation. "He's Arthur Randall," Marta said suddenly. She traced her finger along the edge of the photo. "You first came here 3 years ago with him. He said you were his most proud student and that you would become the sharpest knife." My phone vibrated in my pocket. It's Anna's video call. Her face was squeezed into the screen, with a desk piled with code books in the background. The results of the comparison are out. Arthur Randall, a former senior consultant for Interpol, led the initial investigation of the watchmaker project 10 years ago. And then, I squeezed the photo tightly, my knuckles turning white. "And he didn't report it." Anna pushed her glasses. "He contacted the watchmaker as a consultant, secretly controlling their smuggling routes and capital flows. He was also the one who sent you to work undercover under Lucien 3 years ago." Blood rushed to the top of my head with a buzzing sound. I stumbled and bumped into the corner of the table. It turns out that I was not involved by accident, but someone pushed me into the vortex with his own hands. From losing my memory in a car accident to being framed for murder, there were all chess pieces in this game, and the man playing the chess was Arthur, whom I once regarded as a mentor.
Isabel has new news. Roland's voice suddenly came from behind Anna.
He held up another phone. Isabel's face was on the screen, and the car window was shaking in the background. "Arthur is in Geneva, at the Alpine Security Summit. He is attending the meeting as a private security consultant, hoping to integrate the remaining forces of the watchmaker." Address. I gritted my teeth. "Tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, Lakeside Conference Center." Isabel tapped her fingertips on the steering wheel, but he arranged the security of the venue himself. "It's impossible to force your way in." I took out the encryption device from my pocket. This is what Arthur taught me to make, using Morse code and Fibonacci sequence for double encryption. "I have a plan," I said. "He taught me how to set a psychological trap. I'll leave a coded message like the one I wrote in the undercover log, and he'll definitely show up." The late-night sea breeze poured into the balcony. The Mediterranean Sea glowed silver in the moonlight, like a crumpled satin. I held the phone and listened to the dial tone. "Hello?" Isabel's voice was sleepy. "I won't appear as a victim tomorrow." I looked toward the lighthouse in the distance, nor as an informant. There was silence on the other end of the line for 2 seconds. "What's your identity?" "His students." I touched Arthur's face in the photo to put an end to it. The wind lifted the curtains and rustled the papers on the table. The forged passport in the iron box was blown open, and Ellery in the photo was looking at me. It was none other than myself 3 years ago, the me that Arthur called Bellkeeper. Now I am finally going to meet the real me that I have forgotten. That's the end of tonight's story. Thank you for listening. Have a good sleep. Good night, dear wanderer.